Should we call to order? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the CFF meeting. I'm calling it to order. The first item is review of the agenda. Any comments on the agenda? Thanks for Heather's work in putting it together because we have some good speakers today and it took a little work to get hold of everyone. So thank you. Again, thanks all for being here. And next we'll go through the roll call. If you could do that, Heather.
Amanda Sullivan-Astor.
Here by video, and I'll be joining you guys in person around lunch.
David Buckney.
Here.
Gary Jensen. Glenn Ahrens.
Here.
Julie Woodward.
Here by video.
Keola Swanson.
Here on Teams.
Kate McMichael. Here. Mauricio Valerio.
Here by video as well.
And Wendy Gerlach.
Here in person. Thanks. The prior meeting summary was sent around for everyone to take a look at. Does anyone have comments to make on that? Seeing no comments, now it's time for public comment. If there's a member of the public, either to make a comment or to introduce yourself. Seeing none, next item, oh, sorry.
I'm Teresa Hauser. I'm a member of the public here in person.
Thank you. Sorry, you're right in front of me. The next item is chair updates. No specific updates other than I know it's been a really busy time in the department, so I want to acknowledge everyone's efforts, perhaps the many changes and things that are going on. I also want to say that Jake Ryan at Interfor might be able to join part of this meeting. He's, I think, out of the office today, but he is the person who we have recommended to join this committee as the industry representative. And so that will be put forward to the board forestry and do, I can't remember, in June meeting. Okay, thanks, Mike.
As a consent agenda item.
Yeah. All right. With that, I will hand it over to Mike for the division update.
Okay, that was the first one there, but with his appointment, and we'll do it on consent agenda item. Just typically don't get pulled down. That's usually where we put as the board of forestry. For those who don't know, when we be members, we just put on consent agenda. We do let the board. We've let Josh Bernard know, and he lets the chair of the board of forestry know appointments. That's typically how we do it. Other updates, I wanted to talk first of all with about a little bit about the legislature, what's going on down there. So ODF had our Ways and Means presentation probably about, let's see, a little over a week ago. That's where we present our budgets and programs for the agency as a whole. For the Forest Resources Division and the connection here for CFF, Josh Bernard went down and gave a presentation for our entire division down there. Went well. There were a few questions they had answered, and I'm not sure if there's any additional questions beyond that. If there are, Josh will be the one most likely going and addressing those. But as far as I know, it went well, and we're moving forward through the legislative process. We'll talk about tethered logging, which is the rule initiation happened with Board of Forestry. For those who were at the Board of Forestry meeting, they actually asked them to initiate the rule, get them going forward as per its legislative requirement. We actually have the board to kind of initiate that. And then there were a panel of folks that were there. I know Amanda was there as one of those from AOL, OSU, and then Warehouse were there to kind of testify on the rule thing. So appreciate you being there, Amanda, for that. I don't know if you have any comments about that, Amanda, or not, or how that went. I thought it went really well myself.
Yeah, I thought that it went really well. There was good questions from the board. I think it's interesting because we're trying to kind of navigate, and this is the second rule making, sort of not the same as the salvage, but in the same vein where it was kind of mandated by the PFA, by in many ways other people that are not then a part of the conversation with the board. So
Yep.
It's still uncertain kind of how the rulemaking will move forward. Whether there's going to be an administrative rule, that doesn't require the whole lit review piece, or if it's going to be a lit review with, kind of, findings and other changes. There's, all of that kind of the how it happens is still sort of out there, but I thought it was a really good contextual framing to start the conversation from, kind of the same spot.
Good, thank you. So the next steps for the tether logging is the Board of Forestry will visit a site. I'm not sure, I didn't catch when that was. I think it's at maybe their April retreat, I believe.
Yeah, yep. So I think the April meeting is the 23rd, and then the 24th is going to be a field tour. And I believe we're going to go to Weyerhaeuser property and look at a Weyerhaeuser tethered side, like a Weyerhaeuser logging crew, out in the Coos Bay area.
Thanks. Okay, it's just kind of some of the, so anyway, that's kind of the Board of Forestry, some things going on there with the division. Want to let folks know that we have our fire team training going on this week. So if some of your folks aren't getting back to you, that's probably where they're engaged at. A lot of the agencies that are at the training this week should be back next week, unless they go on spring break, which probably will be going on spring break next week. So hopefully they should have coverage within the field offices out there for everybody. But just want to let you know those two things go on this week and next week. The other thing we did as far as an agency and with our divisions is we had we call it reforestation training for a lot of our foresters. It was interesting. It was very well received by our foresters. A lot of them stepped into their stewardship forester role with knowing about the logging operation, the forest practice rules, doing all that, but some of them never had the opportunity to go and learn about reforestation. So I think it was a very good training, very well timed for them to actually go and learn about when you go to a nursery and inspect a seedling, what you look for, those kinds of basic things. And kind of wish we could gotten that to them years ago, but they appreciate it. They actually asked when the next reforestation training would be. So it's a good interest. So. And then, of course, people outside the agency said, well, where's our training for reforestation? So maybe that's a conversation we'll probably have to have at a later date to put some of those in place. So very well received. It was good training. Jennifer Ward was the one that kind of put all that together. Huge work. I don't know if she's on here, but I want to thank her. That was a lot of work for her to put that together over the course of, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks, just straight through getting everybody across the state through that training. Let's see, back to the new Board of Forestry member, Lexi of Medico. I'm going to pronounce her wrong. Thank you. Trying to say her name. I'm sorry if I'm butchering it, but Alexi is the new Board of Forestry member that was appointed. I think she took place of Bob on the Board of Forestry. We had the opportunity to meet with her just one-on-one, kind of give her the kind of 100,000 level of our division. I know she's been meeting with the other divisions within the agency. We're trying not to have her drink from a fire hose right now, maybe a garden hose for now. And as she gets accustomed to the agency, we'll start giving her a few more kind of details on the division. But she did very well for the first meeting of understanding that she does come from a Forest Service background, so she does understand. But it was good to meet her, kind of put the face of the name with us, with her. And with that, that's all I have, Wendy, for updates. Any questions?
I do see, I don't see any specific questions, but I see in the chat a request from Maurizio, a link to the agenda.
Saw that, yeah, actually, it's 2 minutes before I could get to it.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Okay.
Yeah, it's been answered. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Any questions for Mike?
I think I can answer.
Okay, our next item is the reforestation report results. With Sarah Steve Kern and Emily Martin. Do you just think that's ready to go? Should we just wait for them to?
They are on.
Oh, hello, Emily. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I'll be the main person presenting with Sarah as my moral support. So I can get that started if everyone's ready.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
I need to have permission to share.
Okay, you should have.
All right. All right, can everyone see that all right? Sorry, let's start on the first slide. There we go.
Yes.
Is everyone? Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Good, Emily.
All right. All right. Hi, I'm Emily Martin. I am a compliance monitoring specialist in the Water Quality and Compliance Monitoring Unit of the Forest Resources Division. And today I'm going to be presenting on our reforestation study results from our compliance monitoring program. So first off, a little bit of background on our compliance monitoring program and what our purpose and goals are. So we monitor forest practice rule implementation and analyze our compliance rates. And then we assess the Forest Practices Act rule compliance and report findings, and then identify areas that need improvement through training and guidance. And then we provide education. And this is all to increase transparency and trust with the public. So this might be a little small on some people's screen, but it's just highlighting all the staff that's in the water quality and monitoring unit. I'm kind of in the middle there, but we have several compliance monitoring specialists, including Sarah Stifkin, that's on here today. So who does what? Because we have a compliance monitoring program, and then we have the stewardship foresters that we also work with. So on the compliance monitoring side, we assess compliance of forest practices rules, and we do statewide statistical studies, but we do not do any enforcement. And we use this, as I've mentioned before, to inform education, outreach, and process improvement. So for stewardship foresters, on the other hand, they conduct the site-specific inspections, and then they focus on high-risk complex operations, and they do enforcement and provide technical assistance to landowners. And we often work with the stewardship foresters when interfacing with landowners. So here's our general process that we go through. First, we select the rules. In this case, they were our reforestation rules. Then we create a pilot study to kind of fine tune our data collection, analysis, our methods. And once that's all taken care of, we take the lessons learned and create a larger scale full study that has similar steps. And each time we report out on these. And then we use that information to educate stakeholders and target outreach efforts. So within the Department of Forestry, we collaborate between the monitoring staff and field coordinators and other subject matter experts. We also have a compliance monitoring program committee that we work with. That is a stakeholder advisory committee with representatives from state agencies, industry, conservation groups, etc. We also have an external statistical body, which is our consultants, Mount Hood Environmental. So starting off, how do we select our rules? We prioritize rules for compliance monitoring studies that and ensure that they're practical to monitor, because it's not practical to monitor every single one. So we focus on rules that are more critical and feasible for monitoring. And then we frame each rule as a question and determine its suitability for inclusion in monitoring studies. Now, some rules are a lot more measurable than others. So when we look at them, we decide, hey, can we measure this rule? Has it been assessed in other ODF monitoring studies? Do other states include this rule in their compliance programs? And then we look at past compliance issues or penalties related to the rule, and then we determine if compliance can be determined at least 1 year after activity because, it takes a while to create these studies. Oh, here's an example of how we might create a question from a rule. So here we have a rule that looks at uh, vegetation retention for a prescription for a type N stream. The rule states that for a large and medium type N streams, the operator shall retain all trees and vegetation within 75 feet from the edge of active channel or channel migration zone. We convert that into a question form that states, for large and medium type N streams, did the operator retain all trees and vegetation within 75 feet from the edge of the active channel or channel migration zone? As you can see here, we don't really change much of what is in there. We basically just create a question version of the rule, so the whole rule is included in our study. All right, so on to our specific reforestation study results. Well, our reforestation study generally, then we'll get to results. All right, so the rules we specifically looked at within reforestation rules, we're looking at free to grow stalking standards, and we looked at percent compliance with those standards. So for something to be free to grow after 6 years, it has several things. The stocking standards have to meet several things. To be free to grow, they have to be well distributed. They have to be acceptable stocking species. They have to have good form. So, straight, not diseased, not a lot of damage, and a high probability of remaining or becoming dominant over undesired competing vegetation. So for our sample draw, we selected harvest units using the Forest Active Electronic Notification System. It was a random draw from clear-cut operations that were 2 to 120 acres. And these were harvest operations completed in 2016 to 2017, so we could get those 6 years post-harvest to look at those free-to-grow rules. And it was stratified by landowner type, either private industrial or private non-industrial. So in total, we looked at 39 private industrial units and 25 private non-industrial units. If you look at the sample overdraw that we have in the far left column, you'll notice that we have a large sample overdraw for public non-industrial. That's just because we had a lower response rate so that we could get the number we needed to survey to do our statistical analysis. And that response rate was included in Mount Hood Environmental's statistical approach. So here you see a grid that illustrates one of our sampling sites. It shows our different plots on a sampling area. So we conducted field work in October 2023 to May 2024. These plots were fixed area plot sampling plots. They were 1/50th of an acre, and there were at least 18 plots per unit. When there were things like streams or roads, we had an offset protocol to make sure that we were measuring plots that were representative of areas where planting occurred. So a little bit of background on what free to grow looks like when competition is involved. We call these kind of cones of influence. So the far left green kind of cone of influence shows us that, hey, we don't have other vegetation to the side, like growing over this stalk tree. It has a lot of room. It's most likely going to outcompete. When you look at the red cone of influence next, you can tell that the other vegetation to the side of the stalk tree is too tall and it looks like it's going to overgrow the stalk tree eventually. And then we ran into some kind of in-between things that was a maybe free to grow, maybe not. We spent a lot of time calibrating as a team to make sure that when we made those judgment calls that we knew what was most likely to be free to grow. So even though there might be some competition, if it looked like most of the tree was going to have plenty of access to sunlight, then we went with a free to grow call. So yeah, there was some judgment involved. So going off of how we calibrated to ensure our field staff consistency, we also had 8 sites that we surveyed twice with different field crew each time. In the results, there was no evidence that measurement error biased compliance estimates, and our measurement error only accounted for 3% of total observed variance, which was pretty good. So it paid off that we did a lot of calibrating. So our compliance criteria looked at the data I looked at to determine compliance for each harvest unit, and units were classified broadly as in compliance or non-compliance. This was based on the required trees per acre, and it was expressed in seedling equivalents per acre. Our reforestation study results have been published in a report by Mount Hood Environmental that was published on September 30th of 2024. If you're interested in looking at it, it's on the website, the ODF website, and there's also a little scan thing here. I can make this available if anyone would like to look at this later. So for our final results, the key results were that for private industrial, we had a 92.3% compliance estimate. For private non-industrial, it was a bit lower at 76%, but our overall compliance estimate was pretty high at 89.4%. So here's just a visualization of our results. As you can see, private industrial, we had a little bit higher compliance. Sometimes for non-industrial, we had a little bit lower, but overall, both had majority in compliance. And we did have, in some areas, you'll notice that there were lower seedling equivalents per acre required. That was just based on the zones, like the soil zones that the stock trees were planted in. So we took that into account. So here's just an example of some of the things we saw out there. We saw a lot of really well-stocked units. You can see that this hillside to the left is really dotted with a ton of stock trees, and then there's kind of an up-close picture of more of the trees. And then, we ran into several with low stocking units for whatever reason. We were looking at compliance, so we did not have specific ways of looking at why compliance did not occur, although there's some anecdotal evidence that, hey, maybe some browsing occurred, or maybe there was a drought in this area, but that's not really what our study was focused on. Another thing that we definitely saw out there that was anecdotal but pretty obvious is that there was some weed competition issues on some of our plots that we looked at out there. If you look at the far left picture, that's Sam Schock, one of the people who did the data collection. I was out there as well, and so was Sarah. And some of our plots were had very tall weeds. I mean, we were hacking through them. To give you an idea, Sam is over 6 feet tall, and that's where the weeds were at one of our sites. And this was something that occurred in several areas. Blackberry really put a stranglehold on some of the stock trees on certain units. There were also just areas, for whatever reason, that had poor seedling survival, so you got a patchy distribution. So our main takeaways of the study are that reforestation compliance is high overall, and that non-industrial landowners face greater challenges with things like weed management. So now that we've done our full study, we're in the education phase of the compliance monitoring steps. So right now we have a communication plan out for spreading the results of our study. And we want to ensure that we inform real world forestry practices and share findings with internal and external stakeholders. So what's next up for compliance monitoring? So now that we've done our reforestation rules, we are going to be doing riparian rules, road rules, and steep slope rules. These are all things that were highlighted in the private forest accord. Our riparian rules pilot study is already being close to being started. We're going to be contacting landowners soon for that study. All right. Thank you all for listening. Do you have any questions for myself and Sarah?
Yes.
Actually, rather than a question, so this is Kate McMichael, rather than a question, I want to say that we've been on a couple of these calls, Teresa and I both, hearing about this study, and wow, this is so much better than I think I had feared in terms of how this would be communicated. So kudos to you guys. Is this what you were thinking of sharing out at like the Family Forest Convention, like this particular presentation, or yeah, something, are you tinkering with it to share out there, or?
I think it'll be similar to this, but actually, like a lot of this goes to I will give credit where credit is due. Sarah made most of this presentation, so thank you, Sarah. But I think it's going to be pretty similar. That might be something that Sarah can answer better.
Yeah.
Great.
Hi. Yeah, I think with the Family Forest Convention, I think that's will be part of a panel, so kind of a different format, just with other people on a stage at the same time. But yeah, like the main beats, the main points will be the same.
So just a two-part question. I've been working with some of the folks in the department to put together a framework to better convey the results of the study to our OSWA and Tree Farm members. So that's currently under development. But the two-part question I have is, one is, oftentimes when you're meeting with people like us, you're preaching to the choir because we're not the folks that have the reforestation issues. It's others. And so I'm wondering, how do you plan, and you mentioned a communication plan, how do you plan to get outreach to the common person that A, may not go to tree school, B, has 5, 10, 20 acres, but like you say, is pretty ridden with blackberries. C seems very have low energy to try to do best management practices. So what's the plan? Because I think, we don't know, what at least from your plan, I didn't see a statistical breakdown of what kind of landowner you were confronting with these randomized plots. If you drew from a sample of 39 that you got access to, you ultimately arrived at 25 or whatever. How many of those are just people that aren't into this, right? Just want to live on their place and have a horse and a cow and they're happy. So how do we reach out to those people? So get to the question after I laid the groundwork. Is do you have a communication plan to reach out to those kind of folks? And B, is this plan developed to a level that we can see it and maybe integrate that into this overall thing that we're doing for Oswald and Tree Farm? That makes sense?
Sarah, are you okay with taking this one? I know you've been more involved in the communication plan than I have, so I think you do better if that's all right.
Totally. Yeah, I think the answer is kind of like all of the above. So we're in some ways, like, since we are compliance, like we're passing the torch to like the training folks, public affairs, like that's their wheelhouse, right? Like they're good at communicating this stuff. We do have a draft communication plan, which I think we'll be able to share pretty soon when it's all finalized. but yeah, I think it's sort of like a multi-pronged attack, right? Just to like talk with people. I think the reforestation training that Mike mentioned, working with the Stewies, I think that was an important step because they're actually like face to face with the small landowners who might not be going to tree school, like kind of that crowd. And then I recognize a lot of you with that the partnership for forestry education. I think they're kind of working on it as well. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying we're kind of leveraging the expertise of other stakeholders who like do have those relationships with small forest landowners, and sort of passing the torch with like the day-to-day communication. Hopefully I explained that
And this
well
is
enough.
something kind of small, but something that we did with one particular unit because you could tell there was care that was put into it, but blackberry just popped up enough to kind of just get some areas that maybe they had missed with treatment. And so we actually contacted them after looking at their land so that they could go through and release some of their seedlings. That wasn't something required, but we are trying um, to like, in addition to being whistleblowers, like where we could during the study, if we thought something was something, a landowner could work on, we just mentioned it to them to help them out.
Yeah, Teresa?
And this is more a curiosity because I know what we're going for is getting to stocking levels. But was there any inquiry about how many seedlings were actually planted versus what the stocking level got to?
No, I mean, sometimes we did get that information from the landowner. They did say how much they planted, but it wasn't something that they were required to give us, from my understanding. So we did get that information from some people, but it wasn't part of the official statistical analysis.
Yeah, so I think to clarify with that, so what Emily showed you is the rule, they have to be black and white when they do this compliance stuff, so that's kind of why she kind of states the letter of the rule. Yes, that's me, but that's a good question later on.
Those two have questions.
Yes, Julie?
I think Amanda was before me.
Okay, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So it sounds like there's a lot of maybe cooks in the kitchen, trying to address some of the challenging, uh, kind of ways to explain this and kind of contextualize the information, right? Because I think there's a worry that anything lower than 100% is gonna be a challenge for people that already don't think that we're doing good around reforestation or don't think that we reforest. And I think in the compliance monitoring committee meeting, we had discussed, more of a shift away from calling it a reforestation study and really recognizing that this is really a free to grow study, which comes along with its own challenging words because nobody knows what that means other than people that work in the industry. So I just wanted to ask, kind of in all of the different circles that this is working through, how has that been going in trying to describe, really this is about free to grow. It's, how, and kind of looking at, and I don't know if there's any background information or any additional tables that you guys can create around the samples and how many of those locations like actually were reforested. Like these are places that actually have trees on them. They just didn't always meet free to grow. I think that was one of the big messages that we were trying to convey during the compliance monitoring meeting where this was kind of proposed and we had a more robust conversation. So just curious about those points since I'm not involved in all of the different framework conversations.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know if like I'm gonna be able to address this fully, but for free to grow, every single unit that we looked at, I think minus one, there was active reforestation efforts, and the one that didn't have an active one and was just like natural regeneration, I think actually made the goal of the stalking because they knew what the natural area was capable of. And I'm pretty sure it was, if off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it actually met the requirements. But generally, yeah, I mean, every place, like, people tried to reforest the unit to best of their ability, and free to grow. Sometimes it's not always in sometimes things like drought and browsing get in the way of getting to that free to grow status. So yeah, that is something that it's kind of hard because we're really, as we've talked about before, we're really just the people who are like, hey, this is what our compliance rates look like, kind of just like a whistleblow, like, hey, how can we kind of lead the charge, like, start the charge, I guess, not lead it, for helping people who are having trouble getting to that free to grow status. Um, and I think that makes sense to try to continue to frame it that way, in our presentation and in answering questions.
Yeah, totally. And I think, Kate, I feel like that was something you brought up at one of our previous meetings, that like the free to grow part of it was kind of like we buried the lead with that. So, which was in hindsight, yeah, obviously. So we've definitely made a point of like bumping up that it is a free to grow study, like not all aspects of reforestation. So trying to like throw that free to grow diagram in there, mentioning it more throughout our presentations, just to kind of hammer home that like it's not that people aren't trying to plant trees. The trees just, for some people, aren't doing so well. So yeah, just trying to roll that into the presentations a little more for sure.
I have a follow-up, but I'm sure Julie has some really good insight too. So I'll let Julie go because she might answer my question for me.
Thanks, Al. I just want to say a thank you to Emily and Sarah to start off with. I've seen the presentation a few times now, and you're getting better every time. So thanks for always taking that feedback. I also want to give them both kudos that they intended their job to be field crew, and then now they're out doing hard communication, which is a whole different set of expertise. So I appreciate every time I see that you're willing to jump in and have the hard conversations. And as I mentioned, they're helping to bring this awareness so then the rest of us can help take up. And I think this committee is key for also being part of, we're hearing this message and where do we need to go next. The Partnership for Forestry Education, we did have this presentation and there's been a lot of talk afterwards, much like how Dave talked about OSBA, working with the department. We've also been in talks with the department. And so it's very likely we're bringing back kind of alive. We had a seedling working group that, if many of you remember, a response after the Labor Day fires. And so it will likely morph now into like a reforestation working group. And because there is a lot of tiers to this, as everyone is saying, there's that tier to how are the trainers being trained, like the stewardship foresters, the extension foresters, what are the tools that they have? And then there's how do we collectively as a group go out and reach the public further? And so that's, social media campaign, workshops, trainings. And that's where we can do a lot more together as we move this forward. So we're definitely wanting to continue those efforts. Many of you might know there's a book, Our Guide to Reforestation in Oregon, and it was last developed in 2006. And we've been saying for a while that it really needs to get updated. And there's really great timing for that. So there's a lot of tools that we know are out there that it's, we have a lot new information. And we also know it's been hard to grow a tree the last couple of years. Oregon's in a state that we used to think we can just plant a tree and it grows like a weed. It's now the last few years have shown us some really challenges. And so it's time to kind of double down on those efforts. And then the last thing I'll just point out is knowing that free to grow is the really key part of this, and reducing weed competition. We have a really strong, it's called the Northwest Forest Vegetation Management Conference that happens in early December, and this has typically been a conference that's been attended by a lot of the industrial foresters. ODF used to be more involved with it, and we've also at times had scholarships for small forest landowners. And so we're having a lot of conversations. How do we get a lot of that great information and more people attending at that and or taking that out to the public? So just saying, I think we have a lot of tools in Oregon. We just need to probably regroup and help get this out. And I appreciate the mock Emily and Sarah bringing this to everyone's attention for us to get re-engaged on this important topic.
Okay, I have a couple of follow-up questions. One that's like a more pointed, real question, and one that's a curiosity. As moving forward, because I know that now it's the passing the torch, it's the moving forward. What do we do with this information? How do we assist folks that are struggling? How accessible will the people who did that on the ground, boots on the ground monitoring be to be able to share some of those and that anecdotal experience of what they saw? Because it feels like that information will be helpful in terms of that distinction. And thank you so much for making more and more that distinction between, well, they tried, like, they tried, but things died and they're having to try again and again. But just wondering how accessible folks will be to share that information, just because sort of knowing what people saw, because every time you add some of that, that's really helpful information, I think, for those of us that are going to be a part of it. And I'm guessing you've had those conversations already. I'm on some of those. Have been in some of them, but not all of those conversations. But so that's question one. So I'll let you answer that.
So this gets a little tricky because we've been in the past, I think a lot of you are familiar with compliance monitoring, being told that we needed to be more statistical with our approach. So we have to be careful about how we talk about anecdotal information. But I could definitely see people like myself and Sarah being available to take questions. We just have to walk that line like in several areas. I mean, I think we're really trying to educate as much as we can and make this information accessible to as many people as possible. But we're going to have to be careful about treading that line so that people realize, hey, like, we may have seen this on some plots, but we can't, say it's the end all be all because it's anecdotal information and we don't have the statistics to back it up. So it's a bit tricky. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, you nailed it. It's such a tricky balance. Trying not to over extrapolate, but still trying to be helpful. But I mean, as far as being available, yeah, well, if anyone wants us to come chat for anything, well, yeah, we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what kind of Julie was getting at there is given what we found with what you discovered out there on the land, it'd be great information to actually feed into that partnership with forestry education. This is kind of where that might reside. That way it kind of keeps the lines clear between the work that you're doing and the work that we can do with landowners later on. So
because I was thinking part of the training, the trainers.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, I think it would roll into the training, I think is where we're going. But Emily and Sarah can always talk to Jennifer Ward and Julie to try and get that into that training piece there. Then I don't know if we answered Dave's question about the comp plan, folks, I think that'll come out of that training as well. But specifically to those landowners that may or may not be in compliance, that's a piece I think we still need to figure out. I think that's how we're working on it.
You're in my email chain, right? I asked that question to get some sort of because I mean, that's close the loop.
Yeah.
For those that really need it. I mean,
That's-
people just need to educate it, but some.
My second question was just a curiosity question. When you're talking about competing vegetation, the example you gave was blackberry, but I'm thinking which kinds of vegetation were you looking at the most? Because I'm just thinking like our own property, like where, like hazel grows like crazy and gets pretty tall, but sometimes if it's far enough away, the seedling seems to be doing pretty well. And and it's really hard to get hazel out of the ground without sort of destroying the soil, which you don't want to destroy the soil for the tree as well. Just wondering, and that's literally a curiosity, what were you looking at for that competing vegetation?
Yeah, so anything when we trained on free to grow, anything that was like taller than the stock plants that were like, that you could tell was going to grow over, like it depended, like even kind of bunchy grass could count as
Right.
something that could impede the growth if like the seedling was really short. For things like hazel, yeah, we did see that sometimes, but if the stock tree was pretty tall and like we had an idea of which way it was going to grow and there was some room on the side, kind of like that yellow cone of influence we talked about, like we tried to make good judgment calls, and keep in mind, hey, like this stock tree is probably going to be fine, so it's free to grow. That's the hard part about free to grow, is you really have to you really have to make some judgment calls. But it was any vegetation that was around
Okay.
these stock trees that was not something that could be sold as timber, essentially, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, because that one, I think, as moving forward will be an interesting question or conundrum. It's like, if what you're also trying to have is some some diversity on your property, where are the lines, how much space, how much is it the trees that are growing and how much of it's like providing other sorts of habitat, and because we make that judgment call all the time. It's like, oh, well, some things that are thriving, it's like that, whether it's the chinkapin or not just on our property, it's like, well, where do we think that actually probably has a better chance of surviving, and it's providing some habit, it's providing something valuable. It's like, well, is it a trade-off here, individual tree wise? So it's sort of a takeoff of this compliance question, but as we start talking to landowners, I mean, we're making those decisions all the time. Is this place worth rubbing out again for a tree, or is it not? Because seedlings are expensive if you're small. You're paying a lot of money and putting a lot of time in. So, yeah, as we talk to landowners, I think they'll have lots of. But
Yeah, I have a couple of questions too. I don't recall seeing a previous study that would be directly comparable. So was there any like historical comparison to the last time you did a free to grow study? I don't remember seeing that. Is there anything to compare the results to from the past?
Unfortunately not. There were some reforestation rules studies in the past. I think there were a couple of them, but they were not as statistically rigorous. This is kind of this is like the very first the very first study with our kind of newly revamped compliance monitoring program approach, where we focus more on having an external statistician to make sure that in the future, like, we might redo this free to grow study so we can look and see how things are in the future versus now. So it's comparable, but we don't have any direct comparisons now. This is kind of the beginning of our more rigorous approach.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was the case. The other question, speaking of statistics, did the statistical consultant have any, I don't know, input about the real answer, given that you started with 180 or something prospects, and then the ones that just didn't reply and the ones that didn't give permission, so then you're down to 25 for your sample size. You got to think that a bunch of those ones that wouldn't let you out there didn't want you to see what was there. So was there any input from the statistical consultant on how you interpret the results given that really high rate of people that chose not to allow the sample?
So I'm going to caveat this with, I am not a statistician, so I do not understand the inner workings of MHE's approach, but I do know that they did incorporate the uncertainty associated with the non-response into their statistical approach. It was something that we had several talks with them about. So it is in here. The good news is, going forward, there's been some changes to the rules where we want to keep it cordial with landowners, but we are basically allowed to go on to anyone's unit to do compliance monitoring studies in the future. Again, we want to be really sensitive with how we approach it still, but this will be less of an issue in the future, thankfully.
Okay. Yeah, that just seems like a real challenge, and time break out the drones and the robots. I know, it's not going to happen, but
They
And of
might be
course-
more mad about drones than people being on their land.
Yeah, I know. It was a joke. But yeah, we're there obviously for the educational part. I mean, one of the talks I'm always giving is overcoming reforestation challenges because it's not easy. You know, it's getting harder with challenges that we have. So I want to help people.
Mauricio.
Thank you. Good morning. Emily, Sarah, thank you. I just learned all the time. And today I learned something I have not heard before, the free to grow. I am kind of I'm going to keep that in the palm of my hand. So I have a question. Is there clarity of what kind of forestry management or forestry practices trigger a reforestation plan? In other words, if we do many of our, I'm a small landowner, and I have always done some selective harvesting. The picture that you showed picture of clear cuttings. They were followed by planting with no stick standing. I mean, there are rules. So is that clear to the practitioner, to the small landowners? What are those practices? They need to be followed by reforestation plans, and those that they're not, because clearly do not scale up to that model.
Someone said something in the chat just real quick.
Mauricio,
About
yeah, I think it's only final harvest, isn't that right?
It's not
Thinning and
Keola.
selective, it's not?
No, you have to keep if you're deemed forest land, it's how many trees per acre. So the reforestation rules are having a minimum. I mean, they're pretty minimum. It depends on your site productivity. So in Eastern Oregon, it's less, around like 100 to 150 trees per acre. In Western Oregon, it tends to start at 200 trees per acre. So you could hit it if you were selecting that much, but typically select thinning, you're not getting below the minimum threshold, and that's what they are, their minimum. So the minimum is what has to be out on the ground, no matter what the activity is.
Yeah, and
Thanks,
to
Julie.
add
I didn't realize that.
and Julie's correct, and that's on a quarter acre and larger, if I remember the reforestation rules correctly. So,
Which becomes really complicated after you have like major disasters. And how long do you have then to get your reforestation and your trees back to free to grow when you had nothing to do with what happened other than, suffering through it? So.
And that's where, Kate, do you get a longer lead time for reforestation after a force majeure?
so it depends. So it depends upon terminology. If there's issues with like seedlings, or if there's nursery fall down, or if the stocking that you get from nursery doesn't grow, you can get a waiver, but it's not a forever waiver. It's like a few years waiver to kind of help keep reforesting. But you have to actively seek that from the stewardship forester. You just can't request it at year 7. Yeah, like Kate and Teresa have been actually working on it. And I think you got a waiver on your reforestation part.
Well, we haven't been to 6 years yet.
Okay, so it'd be between them and the stewardship forester. Trying to remember the rules in my head, but it'd be a waiver if there's an issue with something beyond the landowner's control. But it's usually temporary. It's like a year or two after.
But there's still a harvest involved in some of that. If you haven't harvested, but you've
Right.
had this suffered a lot, all your trees died because there was a fire. Certainly your county's gonna come after you if you have a forest deferral, but that one's, I don't know, where do you look to find how long do you have then?
I don't know, not required to, when it's a natural disaster, you're not necessarily required to replant trees if you didn't do any salvage logging, correct?
Except your county will come after you. If you're-
Yeah, there's the forest practice rules, and then there's the
Yeah.
county tax,
Yeah.
taxation, which is a different story. And I've called the county tax assessors in my counties and asked them point blank, how are you handling that for all the people that were affected by fires and aren't able to, trees aren't coming back for one reason or another? And they said, right now, we're on hold. We're not disqualifying anybody who got burned, but it kicks the can down the road to the future. And then there was a question of people who salvage logged and they're trying to reforest, that's another story. And many of those people need to apply for waivers because they just aren't able to succeed after all the challenges that they have with weather and seedlings, et cetera.
Teresa?
One quick observation, when we look in the forest, typically our natural regen, they never fall under the categories of free to grow, because when they grow by the hundreds together and they clump up. So they don't know that rule yet. I probably need to get back in my forest and tell them that they need to be more neighborly and spaced correctly in a way that allow other trees to grow.
And
Now,
stop growing in the roads.
Just going off of that, for the natural regeneration, we saw that, that clumping a bit more with the oh gosh, the hemlock. The hemlock was really interesting in some places, but we didn't disqualify all the trees in a clump. It was just like, okay, we take the tallest one, and a few of them around it aren't free to grow, but just like anecdotally, in those plots, we did have generally enough trees per acre. It's just, you'd get one out of a clump or two out of a clump or something, because, thinning's going to occur and not all of them are free to grow. So just something that to kind of give you an idea of how we handled those. They were pretty challenging plots to categorize.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Let's have one more, Amanda, and then move on to our next presentation, if that's okay. Amanda?
So on kind of that point around the fact that, there is a mosaic out there on the landscape and, to the point that has been made by multiple people now around, the fact that you guys weren't looking at, there weren't very many stands, if any, that, really didn't have trees on them. Is there, kind of a graphical representation or within the data, is there a way to describe kind of that where things fell within that framework? Because obviously there's like a yes, no, it met free to grow requirements or didn't, but how far off was it? Because I think everybody's just really worried about kind of the data being flipped and turned against us and, oh, well, 20% of land is not meeting reforestation requirements in Oregon. Like that's a pretty damning and damaging kind of headline, right? So, but if it's, 99% is meeting, is 99% of the landscape is 90% there or whatever it is, right? Like, is there a way to look at that, or do you have that type of data that could be more descriptive, or even like looking at it from a like including like an image with it, like the illustrated manual around the reforestation guidelines has sort of visual representations of like this requires reforestation and this does not, and like instead of just using data and bar graphs and things like that, what does a forest look like when it's 80% of the way there versus 20% of the way there on free to grow?
Yeah, it's going to be small because it's just a screenshot, but I copy pasted it into the chat. It's on page 13 of the reforestation report, and it does show, like, if it's pretty technical, and to your point, I feel like there's probably a way to make it more accessible for like a non-technical audience, but it does show kind of like the range of seedling equivalent per acre. But yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. But I think there's a way to make that less technical.
Yeah, because I mean, looking at, as we said before, there were at least 18 plots per unit that we looked at, and even on those plots where maybe the whole unit wasn't considered in compliance, because there has to be at least like 80% of it essentially of the unit has to have, has to meet it, if that makes sense. And it has to be well distributed and have all the free to grow requirements. But there's probably a way to look at each unit and be like, okay, like this many made it, but it's still like as a unit didn't reach that 80% that's required by rule. This doesn't give the full picture because we're focused on compliance of units, but I do think there could be a way to go in and look at the units, and you could even show, if you wanted to, you could show each unit having like a gradient with some having red and some having green. I think we actually sent that to some of the landowners in their report afterwards, being like, okay, like this is where your free to grow trees are, and this is where it didn't meet it, and there's a gradient. But we just kept that for the landowners specifically because we don't want to share people's unit info. That's where it gets tricky. But yeah, that is something to consider when talking about this, that yeah, it's in compliance if at least 80% are free to grow, and sometimes places fall short and it's not always super short. Like maybe it was 75%, that's still not in compliance. So I think maybe when we talk about this, that's something that we could emphasize a little bit, just like while talking like how that 80% means it's in compliance. So it's not like a huge amount of the land isn't covered by free to grow trees. It's just not quite meeting what the rules ask for. Sarah, what do you think about my comments there? I'm just kind of winging it here.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense to me. I wasn't even thinking about the well-distributed part, but yeah, yeah. I think that's a fair point, and I'm sure there's a way to make this more like accessible to the average landowner. Yeah, maybe we'll ask Mount Hood about that, see what they think.
I think we're going to move on to our next speaker, but first I want to thank you for obviously really engaging to this group, and great new information and interesting about your study. So thank you so much, both of you, Sarah and Emily, for being here today and sharing with us. And next we have our land mapper presentation with Jake Barker. Thanks again, Sarah and Emily.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and yeah. Okay. Yep.
To stand up, do you want me to present in front of my computer to have a video? All that?
If you want, I'm assuming you're like a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and if you want to just put it on your computer, then you can control it that way.
So I'm passing out, for those who can hear me, if you can hear me online, I'm passing out a handout, but I'll put it on in the chat also. The like one pager. To take home. I get zero. Is there audio in the room, or do I need to?
Yeah, there's audio.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Towards the end of the morning here. My name is Jake Barker, and I'm the Extension Forester for Columbia, Washington, and Yamhill counties. Really happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's nice to see some familiar faces and colleagues, and also meet everyone. So thanks for having me. So today I have been asked to give a brief presentation on Land Mapper, which is a tool that I have been very grateful to have in my first months in this position. It's a fantastic web-based mapping tool for natural resource professionals and landowners. So today I think I have like a 45-minute slot or so. I'm starting a little late, so I'm going to go through some slides. The main thing is that I'm not going to walk through how to use the website. there's some great videos online from Tree School if you want to check that out. That has more of a step-by-step process of going through how to use Landmapper. Mostly I want to talk about where it's coming from, the history, what a report contains when you do make a map for your property, applications and uses, as well as sort of upcoming emerging things for the project. So here we go. Hopefully I can advance my slides. So the four main buckets I'm going to talk about today are just the general background and history of Landmapper, which is a product that was developed by EcoTrust. I'm going to talk about what's in a report, what's included, where is the data coming from, as well as sharing and exporting. And then a range of uses going from beginner to advanced, and then more of a landscape scale approach and use for this data, as well as some upcoming advancements with Landmapper and ideas for the future. So Landmapper is a website that quickly generates maps for properties in Oregon and Washington. It's sort of two separate sites for Washington and Oregon, and that's one of the first things you'll notice when you go on there. It's easy to set up an account, and when you set up an account, you can save maps, and then you can share them more easily. It was developed by EcoTrust, but throughout the process, they worked closely with an advisory board of professionals and landowners to make sure that they were addressing the needs of the communities who would be using this tool. It provides multiple types of maps and a bunch of great data for a given property. And as I said, there's a bunch of online tutorials that are really, really helpful. When you go through, you generate a report, is what they call it, which will be based on the tax lots that you select. So this is a composite image. This is not what it actually looks like, but it gives you a sense of the pink is the property outline, and then there's a series of maps that are generated for that property. It's really helpful because you can create up-to-date maps for management planning. So if your maps are old from a past forester or haven't been updated recently, this is an easy way to do that. Not only can you look at vicinity and topography and hydrology, but you can also look at forest type and composition. And you can also get a sense of soils and whatnot. This is the sort of one screenshot I'll show from the website. This is what it looks like when you go through. You go onto the website, you open up your property location, and you select your tax lots. This can be a little tricky because you don't have the actual tax lot numbers on there, so you really got to know the shape and outline of your property. And once you do that, it stitches them together and then generates the report from there. So what's included in a report? Most of it's these sort of 11 buckets. Most of them are maps. Some of them are other information, like soil types is a map, but also has the basic descriptions of those soil series on your property. The conservation opportunity areas is cross-referenced with the state initiatives, so you can see what's relevant for your region. Some of the key points on data sources, which is important for landowners, given some of the changing rules with the FPA. So the aerial imagery is that you see on the actual report may be delayed 1 to 3 years, depending on your location, but the date is reported on the map. So you'll be able to see, like in my example, it's from 2023, for instance. The hydrology map is currently, as of last fall, includes the updated ODF stream model. So it has the new sort of model that ODF created to determine which classification of stream you have on your property. Some are just based on the model, some have been ground truth. That's really helpful as landowners need to make decisions about creating buffers around different stream types. It includes salmon, steelhead, bull trout streams, as well as other stream size. The soil type data comes from the federal a soil database called the NRCS Soil Web Survey. That's also updated annually. What's great about this is that it includes acreage of coverage on your property for each series, as well as the drainage, site index, erosion hazard, and restrictive layer depth for those series. And that's important as folks are making decisions about management planning. Again, NRCS data is, it's a national database. It has places where it is ground truth, but it's not going to be exact on your property, and it should be followed up with, taking soil pits and more exploration around soils. And then the big component of Land Mapper are these forest composition maps, which are 10-meter pixels. So it's 10 meters by 10 meters, which is roughly 1,776 square feet. And that is based on satellite imagery, which is generated by machine learning and analysts at EcoTrust. It's an in-house process, and it's really cool. That is updated annually, and it's updated based on most recent aerial imagery. So the aerial imagery on the report may not actually match the data that they use for the forest composition. I learned that recently. So just to do a quick exploration of machine learning, I'm not going to go too much into the weeds here, just because it's quite complicated and I don't fully understand everything. But it's basically made of two components. It's training is the first step. So the analysts take ground-based plots that are on federal and state lands, and then train the model based on that ground truth information to compare to aerial imagery from satellite. Once the model has been trained, then it goes on and predicts the rest of the aerial imagery map from the satellite, which means that even if you don't have your ground truth data at your property, it'll give you a sense of what you have in terms of size classification and a few other parameters. It's a prediction, so it's not always going to be perfect. There's error built into these models, and you might find that maps on your property don't actually align with what maps made for your property may not align with what you have on your property. So it's really helpful because for a long time, foresters and forest managers have used aerial analysis. It goes back to the 70s and even earlier. And it's essentially just a faster and more efficient way of using aerial imagery to get information about forests at scale. Probably the most helpful thing about Land Mapper I found is it's so easy to share. Geospatial data and map data is often huge file size, and it's really hard to share that often. These are great because they're easy to share PDF reports. You can export the entire thing of the 12 different categories, or you can export specific maps. It's really helpful. The other component is that you can download individual maps that are geospatially referenced, meaning that you can take those out into the field and use them while you're on your property and show your active location as you're walking around. And then a new feature, which is even more exciting, is that you can download the full data. So for people who need to have property data, including their property boundary and outline, you can download that here and share it with your forester, or upload it to American Tree Farm System, or whatever your needs may be. So that's really exciting. So today I wanted to just flip through what you get in a report. So I've generated a report for an OSU research forest that's in Western Washington County. It's about 180 acres, which is relatively representative of a small woodland owner. So you'll get a sense of how the data looks on these maps for that size, if that makes sense. Mostly this is mixed age Douglas fir, Western red cedar, but there have been some recent harvests and thinnings, so we can see also what that will look like on the maps. So I don't know how long we want to spend flipping through this, but I'll just go through these so you can get a sense of what it looks like. Here you've got the aerial photo on the left. The date is really small, but it shows that that's from 2023. So in our case, it will reflect recent management that occurred in 2018. Then you've got a nice vicinity map to show you where it is your property relative to things in the area. This shows Hag Lake, as well as some roads and then nearby towns. Then it zooms in a little bit and shows you topography there on the left. So where are your steep slopes and things you need to be concerned about on that front. And then it zooms in again to show hydrology. Here, it doesn't show any large salmon, steelhead, bull trout streams in red because there aren't any in the area, but it shows a large fish-bearing stream. So it doesn't include the buffers, but it gives you a sense of where the streams are and how they connect, and influence, how it would influence management on your property. This is the soil map. It includes soils in the area too, but the percentages are only within your property boundary. And the information that is given for the different series is only a couple categories. So if you're looking for more in-depth info about those soil series, that requires going to the NRCS webpage and getting more details about, you know, colors and whatnot. So now we've transitioned into the machine learning generated maps here. These are a different style map. This is the data that's in-house at EcoTrust. On the left is forest community type. This one is probably like the trickiest map to do and is often the least accurate. Mostly it's just giving you a sense of, based on the canopy, what's the forest community type. At small scales, it's really tricky to do this well from satellite imagery. So this one's helpful, especially at larger scales, but often it's different on the ground. Then you've got tree diameter class on the right. So this is just quadratic mean diameter. It's a really helpful metric for foresters use to determine how to do thinning, how to do spacing, and all that. Again, machine learning generated, and each pixel is those little blocks on the map. And is correlated to the imagery from that forest.
Jake,
Yeah.
don't feel you have to rush because after this we need to get you started a little late. We have a break after
Okay.
this, so don't worry about it.
I'll slow down.
You don't have to slow down. There's a lot of information and they're interesting to look at, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll help you break it up. In the hydrology layer, you said it was updated from the ODF stream type. So does it actually type the streams? Like is a type N or a type or a perennial? I can't see what. Last time I looked at it, I don't think it was at that level, but.
I actually used it a couple of days ago because you can also download the maps without creating an account, because I just wanted to double check because I have like 6 sets of them. But the most recent one was interesting because when I got my ferns report back from a notification for doing some vegetation management, I couldn't find a key to figure out what was being labeled as a fish stream or not. So I went to Land Mapper to pull up the same map to get the key. So it does give you, it's hard to read and quite tell the colors and stuff. It's still not as it's not super easy, but I found that was actually helpful.
Yeah, so it is pulling that information from those.
See if I can.
maps.
Oh, okay, the laser's not going to show on the screen.
You've got a key at the bottom.
Yeah, so like in this, it's hard to see because of the size here, but these are gray, which would be non-fish bearing small streams. And then it changes to blue, which is small fish bearing into a large fish bearing. And then if you had a red line, it would be SSBT.
Okay, so it does have all those categories.
It does, yeah.
That's great.
You have to know what you're looking for though, right? Because the way that FPA writes that is it has different abbreviations for that, and that's not the same. So if you know what you're looking for, you should be able to figure it out.
Great, yeah. Yeah, last time I used it, I didn't get that. But
Yeah.
It changes all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they update
Yeah.
it all.
Glenn, Tree Farm System and OFRI just help pay for that update to help pull that all over.
all right, of course.
So I would say it's first level of trying to pull it over. And I think that type of feedback's helpful. Kate, like if it's hard to read, like those are things it's probably hasn't quite gotten all finalized, but that was our goal, was to start pulling over the maps. If the maps are all accurate, we are not responsible for that. We're just reflecting what's in the database. That's my disclaimer for the day.
All right, yeah, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and I think that another thing here is that as someone who's made maps as a forester, the fact that all of this is pre-made and created is really incredible, right? Because that can take a very long time of formatting, getting everything right, relabeling stuff so it's legible. The fact that it's already all there and it's updated frequently is really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Did you find the wildlife, because Steve's talked a number of times, I thought on a number of meetings, I've heard that wildlife is going to be on one of these maps at some point. Did you find that in it?
So yeah, I forgot to do my disclaimer at the beginning, which is I don't work for EcoTrust. So I'm not, you know, behind the scenes doing the
It
things.
was it there when you downloaded? That was the question.
It was not there when it was
Okay.
downloaded. I did talk to Sarah though. Sarah and I had Sarah Loreno is Director of Forestry and Analytics at EcoTrust, and she's helping sort of steer this ship. And she and I connected, and I kind of got the lay of the land of what is currently happening. She didn't mention anything like that, but I think it'd be great to include that. So I will show you eventually here. There's an easy way to provide feedback on the website. So if you ever have issues or if you have an idea, there's like a great little form that folks can fill out to say, hey, I'd love to see this. And they're looking to improve it. So that's a good one. Yeah.
And I guess I'll just mention wildlife's kind of our wish list, but we're now with moving forward with the digital management plan, we actually think it'll be better suited for when we can incorporate into the plan, Kate, versus the layer that would have brought this out ends up being there's a lot of verbiage that needs to go with it for people to understand what those wildlife things mean. So that was part of not keeping it kind of out of the map package at this time.
Okay. Keep rolling here. So these are the next two maps that are generated that are also part of that machine learning process. Canopy cover on the left is just giving you a sense of how closed is the forest canopy. And I'll provide some examples of management here in a second to give you a sense of what we're actually looking at. That's in just a percentage cover. And then forest density on the right. This is a basal area. So it's square feet per acre. This is another metric, like we were talking about reforestation, so there's some continuity here, but up to a point, foresters think about trees per acre. And then once the forest is above a certain maturity, then you start thinking about basal area, which is essentially just a representation of how dense are the trees in that given area. So this is really helpful too, because it's a great way to know like when you would need to go into a forest to do thinning. For instance, you can see here, this area was recently thinned, and it's a lower density than this area, which hasn't been thinned. So that's one example, but I'll go into a little bit more detail here. So this, I was excited to put this together because it's fun to show what does management on the ground look like on a map. So this is a 4.3 acre clear cut with structural reserves that was done in 2018 on the Matson demonstration forest. Structural reserves means the handful of trees that are left in the unit to provide microsite shade for the regenerating trees on the ground. This is a photo from a drone that was taken like right after the harvest. So it has since been planted, and now the trees are six feet tall or so.
Free to grow.
And they're definitely free to grow, despite the many attempts of elk to turn it the other way. So this, I'm just going to go through what these maps what the maps show for that specific area, and then compare it. So this is the zoomed in area on the left here. This square that I've drawn is around 1,200 feet, 1,200 feet square. And then that little triangle area is the clear cut, 4 acre clear cut. What's important to see here is that on the lower right side of the clear cut, you can see that the trees are different than the shadow of the trees, right? So these are the trees' shadows because the aerial imagery was taken at a certain time of day where the sun was. And that can create issues for the machine learning process, which we'll see here in a second. So here is the tree diameter class for that same area. I think this one is maybe the most affected by that shadow. So it looks like, sorry. Right, the shadow outline is what they're calling to be or a large diameter class one. Actually, it's just the shadow. And then here's the forest canopy cover. So this shows somewhere between 30 and 70% closed canopy. Again, that's like it's a tricky metric, and I'm not sure how that works because it's now reforested. So is it closed canopy or is it still open? I'm not sure about that. And then the forest density here, this shows a pretty good representation of where is it dense. So it captures that density still on the side to the right of the clear cut. Shows the opening where it's not dense. And then viewed all together, this is kind of how you can compare these different layers.
I was getting a little confused between canopy cover and forest density. What's the difference? They seem similar to me.
It's I think the way that they generate the information is slightly different. It's like a slightly different calculation. And then the way that they present it also is more granular for the density.
Well, if you think about just canopy cover, so if you had 10-foot tall trees, but they were covering the
Right.
ground, it would probably show up as high canopy cover.
Mhm.
But they don't have any basal area, which is based on the size of trees. So it's that would be really a different outcome. You could have really high cover of, like, say, 15-year-old trees. The basal area is low because it's young, and so it should pick that up.
So the density is a DBH measurement?
No, it's a basal area, it's a cross-sectional area.
Okay.
Yeah,
Could be related to DVH,
Yeah.
by the square.
higher square.
Yeah.
Okay.
The way some people describe it is if in a single acre, you went through and you cut down every tree at DBH and then measured the area of each stem. And then that will give you the density of that specific acre.
Better way to look at it is if all of us were given an umbrella that only had an opening about this big, we all are, the density would be us as individuals. Now, if we were to remove like 5 of us from the room and get us a bigger umbrella, we still cover the same area, have 100% canopy cover. It's just there's less of this in there. It's the difference between density.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Save that.
This is from Oregon.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now when we're talking about uses, sounds like we've already got some folks in the chat using it already. That's great. So I'm going to start kind of with like the quote beginner level. This is something that I would say I use frequently, probably once a week when I'm meeting people or trying to help folks, especially new landowners. But it's really easy to download the full report or the specific PDF maps from the report, and then share it. So you can email it to folks, you can print it out and share it manually. The thing that I've maybe used the most is that a lot of the American Tree Farm System certifications that I've done are recertifications. They often need a soils map. So this is a really easy way to make a soil map for the property, and then include that in the management plan. That it might be something that I use weekly, but a landowner may only use it once a year or less frequently, depending on how often they need data, or how big their properties are, or the complexity of what they're doing. Then sort of like the next tier up would be, how would you integrate this into management planning? So this I would call more like intermediate use. So you've got the maps, and now how do you actually use that when you're thinking about planning? So here it would be doing stand delineation. So creating areas of your forest where you're going to focus on managing. Maybe you're going to go out and map your roads or mark specific points of interest on your forest. So the simplest approach would be you print these out and then you use a pen or pencil to draw the actual management units. You could also keep it digital and use a PDF editor to draw your stands, or you could use a JPEG and use the image editor. The slightly more advanced approach for that would be using it in the field. So downloading the geospatial PDF, which essentially keeps the coordinates of that area on the PDF so that you can then use a different application and be out in the woods with your tablet or smartphone, looking at the map in real time where you are on your property. This is a little bit more complicated because it requires another application, but here you can navigate while on your property. You can use this location-based app to drop points or to trace your steps as you walk around. You can also use it to draw stands and management units. I've polled some people to see, hey, what are you using these days? And a lot of foresters are using Avenza Maps, which is a pretty easy to use standalone application for smartphone or tablet. It's free up to 3 maps, so that's usually enough for most landowners. And it's really awesome. It's a great way to have, you know, a map for your property that you can use while you're out in the field. You can download offline maps, so if you are in a remote place, it's very, very useful. The asterisk and trick here is that if you draw and make stands in Avenza or drop points with photos, it can be tricky to share that information from Avenza. So that would be like the more advanced stage. But this is great to just have a working map, a digital working map for your forest. Then the next tier up would be more advanced users. So folks who are more comfortable with manipulating geospatial data. You can download the full data package in a zip file from Landmapper's website, and then you would then upload it to your preferred mapping software. And there's several different options out there. Some are free, some you have to pay for. So some landowners may already have a GIS, map project for their land, and they could just pull this data and add a cool new layer to include, whether it's forest density or forest type. The stuff that I've been playing with, which is also kind of a new feature, is thinking about how to use Landmapper at a larger scale. So either at the landscape scale or county scale or even state scale, because the pixels are so small, 10 meter by 10 meter, that's actually smaller than some of the other geospatial data that's out there for more landscape scale analysis. So I'm super excited about this project, just for my own sort of interests as a forester of 3 counties. So this is what it looks like across the state of Oregon. This is the basal area, so the density. So where are the forests most dense? It looks different than how it looks in the reports because of the geospatial visualization. And then for the county, creates these really nice maps. You can really see density and where you got the most dense forest. So I'm really excited about this. Right now it's just request based. So I emailed someone and they sent the data, but eventually that will be something that you could just download from the website. So what's upcoming? So this was also conversations with Sarah. Sarah's great. She's super excited about this work too and continuing it. They've secured funds to do the annual data updates. So that will be mostly to pay the analysts to run the machine learning process, to generate new data, to capture any changes that are happening at the forest level. So if you do a harvest this year, the idea is that it will be updated next year, and that will reflect those changes that you're seeing on the landscape. Or if you had, a fire or a mortality event, it would also be captured year to year as it's being updated from the satellite imagery. They're currently seeking funding for ongoing and new work. So looking to improve Landmapper, expand it, and integrate it with some other programs. But the things that they're most excited about exploring are having a tool on the website where you can create stands. So creating your management units that you would have in your management plan or that you would use when you notify ODF of any activity that's going on your property. They also are excited about having an upload file feature. So if you have data for your property, you could upload it to Landmapper and then have a more like working map within Land Mapper that you could refer to or share with your family members or co-owners. And then the big one that would be, I think, really helpful and would probably address the wildlife thing too, is right now when you generate a report, you get a series of static maps that are all separate. And one of the most amazing parts about using digital maps is that you can overlay data and really get to see like where are things overlapping and working together, or where do you have specific property portions of your property that have a variety of features in the same place. So ideally, there would be in the future a way to overlay the data, so you can see the streams as well as the density, or you can see your streams, your density, and potentially like your wildlife in the area. So creating a more exploratory functionality of Land Mapper, which it currently exists with like the Oregon Geo Explorer, I think is like a pretty common one. So trying to make it a little bit more like that kind of mapping application. And then as we've chatted a little bit about, this is a key part of the management planning tool that the Partnership for Forestry Education is working on. The way one person describes it is the TurboTax of management planning. And so the idea is that Land Mapper, especially as it's improving, would be the way you make maps for your property. And that's something you could do entirely on your own. And it would be a really powerful tool for planning management on your land. They're starting the needs assessment process this year. So interviewing folks, working with people to assess, how could this tool, the management planning tool, best serve different communities. This is going to be great because it'll be integrated with the American Tree Farm System, which is super important for landowners as well. And then there's this asterisk at the bottom. EcoTrust has another management planning tool that slightly outdated right now, but their vision and dream is that they'll integrate Land Mapper with Forest Planner, which is another website that is essentially a place where you could draw stands, you could delineate those management areas, and then you could actually plan your harvests and project growth into the future. So it would be like more advanced, not only management planning, but also projecting how your forest might change over time, which is really cool for like understanding volumes, thinking about how your forest will grow, timing and planning your harvests. So they have a lot of amazing visions for what that could all look like and integrate together. So that kind of covers it for my presentation. I think the main takeaways that I hope folks leave with, if this is new, is that Land Mapper is an amazing, easy to use, printable, shareable mapping program. I use it all the time as a professional, and a lot of landowners in my areas are really excited about this. It gives you an overview of the forest using state, federal, and in-house data, but it's not meant to replace going out on the ground and observing your forest out, boots on the ground. It pairs well with the American Tree Farm System, so it's really well integrated there, which is exciting. Helps people update their properties and work towards recertification if needed, or get a new certification if they're a new landowner. And that there's a lot of new features and integrations upcoming to make it even better. So that is all for me. And now I'm happy to talk any more, answer any questions, or flip through slides again, or whatever you all may need.
Yeah, sounds amazing tool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It
Thanks.
takes so much less time than doing it yourself. Because it feels like it's come around so quickly, because it's not like we've been landowners for that long, and we did our intro to management planning. We did every single map on our own, which we didn't have all our data yet, and I got very good at drawing our property so that I could get it on everything. And it's like, and then you do Land Mapper, and it takes like 30 seconds, and you can download it. And if you don't like signing up for things, you can still download it.
Yep.
Without anything.
Yep.
So it'll be fun at tree school. We're going to have at the OTFS booth, we're going to have I'm going to bring my laptop, and people can actually just download their maps and email them to themselves.
Cool.
That's gonna be great.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, this is just a comment, because obviously we've been following this for years, and at tree school, EcoTrust has been at tree school since I can remember. And they came out with Land Mapper, before that Forest Planner. And in the old days, like, I can't even export, I can't even print it, and now they suddenly have this tool that is a revolution for us. It's so easy to work with landowners using it, so I'm just glad to see it and nice to get up to date, Jake. So,
Yeah.
it's already changed since the last time, that I was using it for a course,
Yeah.
Haven't looked at it since the stream layers got added, so it's great.
Thanks.
Dave?
So, the question I have was, one of your slides, maybe I misinterpreted it, but it had a depiction of forest community, but yet the legend was not, maybe I'm old school, the forest community to me is, primary trees are the overstory, the shrubs and the forbs. And all I saw there was the overstory, maybe the predominant forest type, not the community type. And what the question I have is, if one can upload data, I think it'd be very helpful to integrate, because, obviously it would be tough to define forbs and shrubs from a satellite. But if you could walk your place, not only would you learn about your forest, but you could integrate your shrub and forb community or populations and species with the overstory, and then truly achieve a community. So is that something that you know of, it's in the works, so that you could do that? And for that, you could learn something. I mean, you could compare that to neighboring forests. You could look, because if you look at the old, Franklin Durness vegetation, Oregon, Washington, that's how communities were defined. And so you could learn from those breakdowns. Okay, what do I have here, and what should I have here? Possibly, So is that something you think that could be helped or would be integrated?
I would love to see that. And, I think it kind of gets into understanding how those understory plant communities can be site indicators for different features. And I think that what would be tricky is that ideally with the land mapper, you would have a way to upload data also, so that if you went out onto your property and you had a smartphone or tablet and you walked around and you delineated your areas where your understory was a certain composition, then you went to the next area and it was a different plant community, and then you created all of that information. That's totally possible. From like a data standpoint, it's pretty complicated, but then you'd have to figure out a way to integrate it with this type of data, which is a slightly different type. But having that, I think, would be really helpful. Whether you can detect that from geospatial imagery, probably not. So having a way to do that efficiently would be really amazing.
Integrating that, doing randomized plots like you would do on your place anyway.
Right.
50th an acre, 10th, or whatever makes sense, and then uploading that. And this is all statistics and machine learning anyway, so it should be able to be done.
Yeah.
And the second question, and the last question I have is that what would be really helpful for someone like me who has a lot of streams flowing through their place would be to be able to, you think you'd be able to do this with satellite imagery, would be able to calculate, at least on a course basis, the pool riffle ratio. So for example, if that's an indicator of salmonid potential habitat. And so instead of walking each of your streams, and it varies, obviously. And so if there was a way that you could look at an image and say, okay, well, there's more reflectivity there, that may be indicative of a riffle versus a pool, or whatever machine learning, however they would train that program to work that way, it would sure help to see how in the big picture, how are those changing? Are we making improvements to stream habitat? And that would be easy to do because you don't have to hire a surveyor to actually calculate pool riffle ratio. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So is that something that you think, or that they might be able to somehow integrate into it?
Yeah, I have no idea about that, because right now most of it is based just on the forest canopy. And like in this case, I don't know if you could even, would you be able to do that on this?
Yeah, through the forest canopy to see the streams with the riparian buffers.
Yeah, that's
The
exactly.
smaller streams, yeah, it would not be
So-
possible.
Yeah, so I think Dave, that's getting a little more into like LiDAR type data, which is more expensive to come by. So this is again where I always say like those are amazing wish list. And it'd all be about funding. As EcoTrust says, every time we bring something up is like, well, if you want to do the funding, and then we remind ourselves the original goal for Land Mapper was to just help more landowners get that introductory packet to it. And so I think, those are great conversations to also have as we especially explore like the management plan. What are other things we could do with it? But for sometimes it's the what they have available and then what's available for free that we can give the public. So a lot of those folks who have some of that more integrated, they aren't freely wanting to give that information. So we're sometimes also in this public, what's available for us to give to the public for free.
Because that is one of the awesome parts of it is that it's at no cost.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's an awesome tool.
I had a question that related to something I saw on an early slide, having to do with Oregon conservation strategy and say forest legacy, conservation opportunity areas. So for landowners, they're looking for partners with conservation or possible revenue streams from something like doing a restoration project or a conservation easement. If that is linked in here, because I think I saw a reference to it early on.
Yeah, again, this is really small, but what the last page on a report will tag you with your region. So based on where your property is, it'll then connect you to that conservation opportunity area for that zone. So for here, I pulled it up here, there are two. There's the Scoggins Valley and Mount Richmond, and then it provides you a link to Oregon Conservation Strategy where you can learn more about it and the Tualatin River. So yes, then you have to kind of do some digging on your own to figure out, what's going to work for your property in that area.
I've seen a hand up patiently on the screen, although I can't see who it is, but if you have your hand up, please speak up.
This is Boone Zimmerly. Just kind of curious. First, Jake, thanks for the presentation on Land Map. I was aware of it, but never really dove into it much. It's pretty interesting to see that you guys are going down to a 10-meter pixel, which is pretty finite. What I'm curious of is, currently right now, we also have land fire data that is used. It has veg cover and a few other attributes to it, including wildland fuel models. And those two, right, I kind of feel like land fire and the Mapper program are very similar. And I'm just kind of wondering about integration of the two, or kind of seeing what your thoughts were about how those work together. They're both kind of collected the same way with satellite passage and then doing some machine learning of changes of the vegetation on landscape. And then just thinking about, I know that's going beyond forests, but thinking about east of the Cascades across most all of our rangeland, along with our forests over here, much of land fire data, or in general, just data on the private land out of land fire, is often inaccurate. And it takes quite a bit of adjustments when we're out on fires and we're doing analytics about, fire progression or fire behavior. And then thinking that you guys are getting down to 10-meter and the potential of aligning those two things and being able to use some of your data as well. But just kind of curious what you think about land fire, if you're aware of it, and if you looked at it, kind of parallels and thoughts of integration.
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing I'll point out is that so all of the plots that Land Mapper uses to ground truth, which is I think maybe similar to land fire, is it's only on public land. So it's only on Forest Service, state, BLM, and those are the reference points that they train the model on. So it's even though those forest types are going to be similar on private land, it's not actually reflective of what you might find on private land. Also, Land Mapper has more data for the west side of Oregon too, so it's skewed slightly that direction. I don't know how it compares to land fire. I would assume land fire is maybe a larger pixel size, so not quite as granular.
30.
Yeah, it's 30 by 30. And there's an OSU data source also that's 30 by 30.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
haven't used Landfire a whole lot, but I think that having a component would be awesome of beyond forest density, thinking about having like including a fire risk component or fuel loading and pulling data from Landfire, I think would be really interesting. I would be curious or cautious to answer that as a non-EcoTrust data wizard because I don't know if there's ways for it to like be integrated, if that's possible with Landfire, if there's some boundary that EcoTrust has around that. And whether or not it would be confusing for folks to see 10 meter by 10 meter pixels for their property and then see a 30 meter by 30 meter pixel, which would be helpful if you had 10,000 acres, but if you have 40 acres, you're only going to have a couple pixels. So I think that's a good point, and it's not something I asked Sarah about. So I'll keep that in.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, that layer you referenced that OSU uses, Landfire is the primary data source, and then from there it's adjusted. So they pull it from Landfire and they make adjustments in some of the parameters of the fuel's characteristics. But you can size up and down your pixels, but the smallest is 30 meter out of Landfire, but you can go all the way up to 120. But it just seems like it'd be pretty awesome to be able to have those two both aligned with one another, so we're not using data sets that have differing base layers, like base units. But yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions? If you're on here virtually, just speak up. Seeing no other questions, we'll just say thank you so much. An amazing resource. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain it.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to help.
Thank you. We have time for a quick 5-minute break. That's okay. Better work. 15 minutes cutting it down. We'll see you back here at 11.
Thanks, Wendy. Just to let you know, I have to jump off for about an hour and a half and then I'll be back. Sorry about that.
We're trying not to get you over.
And we're being teased too, you know, like. Calling everything together.
Oh, nice. Yeah, good. Here's my card, can I give it to your friend?
Will someone be at it for thing? Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The two are extensions. And we always.
Thanks again, Jake.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Back to order after our break. Our next conversation is with Josh Barnard.
Thanks, Wendy. Good morning, everyone. Mike invited me over to introduce myself, maybe give a little bit of background here and go around and then maybe see what questions committee members have for me and let's take the conversation from there. So as Wendy said, I'm the Forest Resources Division Chief. So I have two folks that oversee two sides of the operations for me. So Mike Croon is one of those. He oversees the all lands portion of our division, which includes our small forest landowner office, urban community forestry program, and our federal forest restoration program. And then he's also serves as support to this committee. So that's a portion of our business. The other side is forest practices and monitoring, which is under Kyle Abraham. And so that really makes up the scope. So forest practices, administration, monitoring, and then we've got adaptive management and training. So that's kind of the scope of work that we have for Forest Resources Division. So as far as a little bit about myself, I've been working in the division for about the last 10 years. So I was originally in the private forest division, and then in 2021, we added a few more programs, and then the private forest accord expanded the staffing in our division. And so I've been around a little while there and worked up through a couple of manager positions. Was the deputy chief at one point that helped support this committee for a couple of years. And so now, I serve as the division chief. Most of my work focuses on Board of Forestry policy, legislature, things like that. So just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview of the scope and where I've been a little bit here with the division. And so not totally unfamiliar with the committee's work, and I get to review your report every year. And it's probably been a couple of years since I've been able to drop into this committee. I think since the private forest accord passed and all the changes, it's kept us pretty busy. So that's kind of an introduction about myself. So I thought I'd stop there, maybe see if folks have questions for me or any particular topics that are on their mind. So
I was thinking it could be nice maybe if the members of the committee just walk through and say who we are, since we haven't had sort of a conversation in a while. So I'll just start with me, Wendy Gerlach, Chair. I've been on the CFF for a while. My main connection with forestry is through the land trust community. So, and I also just as a lawyer do projects on forest conservation projects and that kind of work. So this has been a really interesting committee to be on, to meet small landowners who land trusts work with a lot. And maybe we'll do just going around this room and then do virtually. So I want to leave Mike out. Let's go around and do people who are here, including committee members.
Mike Crew, Deputy Division Chief for Josh.
I'm Teresa Hazard. I'm not part of the committee. I'm a member of the public.
I'm Kate McMichael. She comes with me. She's my member of the public. So I'm in sort of the middle, I think, of my second term. I think I met you just as that transition was happening. So small woodland owner in VITA. And it's like, it feels like my niche seems to be that really small, really still pretty new to things. And then, hit by one of the 2020 fires. So kind of really with that sort of granular experience and perspective on fire and post-fire recovery. I think that's our experience of the fire and also the kindness of people has gotten us really over involved since then. So also involved in OSWA and tree farm and a number of other things.
Thanks. Hello, Josh, and everyone. Glenn Hermans, I'm the OSU Extension Forester, and I'll start here, Marion, Clackamas, Hood River County, and host a tree school host up there in Clackamas County, which we draw from a larger area. And I represent the College of Forestry and OSU Forestry Extension. So, of course, a lot of work with our landowner communities. Yeah.
I'm Vera Spiller, Administrative Support and Forest Resources.
Heather Henderson, currently budget analyst, but also administrative support for CFF.
Dave Bugney, a small forest land owner and represent the Northwest Oregon area.
It's a little hard to go around the room virtually, but I see Mauricio, so why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning,
please?
everyone. Mauricio Valerio. I represent the Eastern Oregon landowners on this committee. I also am on the board of our OSWA, the Northeast Oregon OSWA club, but actually 5 different counties: Union, Wallowa, Baker, Grant, and Harney. We're trying to a big chunk of land to buy there. And I also serve on the board of Eastern Oregon University. We are connected to academical support of our forest some way, somehow. So thank you.
And Julie?
Good morning, Josh. Julie Woodward with OFRI, the Deputy Director and Director of Forestry.
It looks like the other, like Kayla maybe had to jump off, and so I'm not seeing it. There aren't any other CFF members on there, virtually, are there? See?
Amanda's probably on her way here.
Oh, Mandy's, okay, hello, Ben. With that, let's open up for questions or any sort of just roundtable-ish topics people have for Josh. I have a topic, which is amidst the very busyness of all that you are doing, how there are a lot of committees. And committees both provide benefits to you and also use up some staff resources. And so I was just kind of curious if you have a kind of a vision for using the way to make sure that for the community and for the department, it makes sense to have these committees and make sure that they're providing useful input at the same time you're very busy and need to staff them. So that's kind of a general question about the role of this committee, but every year as we come up on thinking about what we accomplish, how to be productive and how to provide good advice to the state forester and the Board of Forestry, how we do our best at being efficient and productive in conjunction with you all.
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? I think right now, the division, I'll probably miss one somewhere, right? But we have Committee for Family Forestlands, right? Which is advisory to both the board and the state forester, right? Meaning staff here, Mike, gets those things. We have regional forest practice committees, which are established in statute. They have a particular role on some policy items. And then now we have the newly formed Adaptive Management Committee and the Independent Science and Review Team, which is part of that private forest accord. And those are also external to ODF. And I would say the subject of committees comes up or advisory bodies comes up every once in a while. And I'd say that's a pretty conscious discussion to have with staff as we look at that, making sure one, we're not duplicating with existing committees, right? And trying to see how those purposes align with whatever work we might be seeking advice on. And I would say as we navigate different policy topics, I guess that's the piece on my mind is like, what's our interface with those various committees? So at times in the past, I think this committee's actually been used as the rural advisory committee. It's been a while, right? I think the last time was wildlife food plots. I don't know how many folks might have been here for that, but I think this group specifically was the advisory committee for that rulemaking. So from my perspective, I think it's an ongoing dialogue. Like I have a lot of discussions with Mike as we work on different policies and where those need to be floated, vetted, that sort of thing. So I'd say the advice we get from you all is very useful. Trying to, as an organized body and where we can set that up or that we need that feedback. So yeah, it's an ongoing dialogue and trying to find how each piece fits each time a new policy or a different type of discussion. So.
Yeah, I've tried to be aware of the fact that like with technology and changes like that, the role, like in terms of this committee and it just being briefed over time, like you have more efficient ways, I think, to generally brief the small landowner community. So I think from my perspective, I like putting together a work plan that has us looking at educating ourselves on specific topics or coming up with opinions and thoughts on those and providing them to you over time and then our annual report. But if you had something you wanted to say back, you let us know over time, either now or on an ongoing basis.
No, I think the focus for this committee's probably evolved over time, right? Like there's been a lot of different pieces, even going back further than like wildlife food plots. I think some of the original use was around some of our original federal funding that either started out as small programs or whatever. And I think this committee provided some input on how we were going about doing that work and those sorts of things. So depending on what the next change is, there may be another different new focus where we need some assistance there. I don't have anything specific today, but
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you, and Mike, sounds like you're on top of that topic on an ongoing basis, so appreciate that. Other comments, Mike?
Hi, the topic of seedlings and helping small landowners reforest, really pretty important ongoing topic. And then particularly after the wildfires and the post-wildfire recovery challenges, particularly for small landowners, family forest owners. Of course, Extension and all of us have been really involved in that. And we look back at the post-2020 wildfires. How's that going? What have we learned in our attempts to help people? So we're really kind of wondering about the next steps in terms of helping develop, more effective post-fire assistance partnerships and networks and to help landowners, because it's been really challenging. I think there's a lot of different parties all working on the same thing. I'm curious about, the department's, plan for doing this kind of rapid response. I've heard something that you've got some staff working on that. In Extension, we're working on that. So we're real eager to kind of compare notes and see how we're going to team up on this and not necessarily, be redundant, but this is going to be a big, partnership effort. So post-fire response, helping landowners, both the, private family forest owners, but also the larger scale across the landscape, what our role, I'm representing OSU. Obviously, we all have a stake in this. So what are your thoughts about that and the department's role, and who should I talk to?
I think that's a good point. I think, that post-fire topic, I've been in several different conversations, both inside and outside the division over the last year. And I guess what I would say is, don't necessarily like to think about it like this, but that's probably going to be part of our core business for the foreseeable future, right? Like someplace that's going to reoccur again. So you touched on several different pieces there, right? So in Northeast Oregon, we established a rapid response team that was partnered with NRCS that could do that quick data collection and try to speed up that process and get assistance for landowners. And so that was, at the field level, kind of their recognition that they expected that to happen again and, preemptively set that up. We're now more heavily engaged at the state level. Mike's participating in meetings that OEM facilitates that are like it's an emergency response that gets convened at a certain level in the state. So I think an ongoing dialogue there, because I think each entity has a different role, which they do, right? There's the local level, there's the statewide planning effort, there's what we do internally, which I know I saw Lori was on and Katie are on, and I know we have a post-fire recovery toolkit, right, that we have for our internal foresters to follow. So there's all those different pieces, right? It is becoming part of our core business and we're planning ahead for that, but there's so many facets to it, right? And to your point, that education and connection with landowners to get them steered to the right resources, all of the chaos or shortly after is happening is like one of those key steps. So yeah, I think it's one of those that an ongoing dialogue about what all the roles various parties play. Seems like that's appropriate given kind of what I think I'm hearing and seeing, right? Like the acknowledgement that that's probably going to be around and be a common occurrence. We don't know what part of the state it's going to occur in, but to assume it's not going to happen again in the next 1 to 2 years is probably, that would serve us well.
Yeah, I think, we don't need to get into the weeds, but I'd like to kind of connect with that at a statewide level. OSU is interested in seeing where we're at with that, where we fit as facilitators or providing some of the educational, horsepower needed. So I'd like to touch bases with that Eastern Oregon crew, because we have our version here on the west side after the 2020 wildfires, and we have some projects going forward. So I look forward to that. And it really does tie in with just the reforestation in general. We just had the presentation about the compliance, analysis and where small landowners are fitting in that. So it's not just post-fire recovery and reforestation, but it's reforestation in general and the challenges with climate stress and that kind of thing. It seems like those are going to work together or part of this somewhat overlapping challenges. So thank you.
Any other points of discussion? Not seeing you, so I just want to thank you for taking the time for coming by and saying hello. Very nice of you. Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate that. I might even hang out for 20 minutes and just kind of hear how the rest of the conversation goes. Before I gotta jump to my next one. That was sure.
No, that sounds great, because the next item on our agenda is the Board of Forestry update, and Ben Donnelly on the board is our liaison to the board, and we appreciate your being here to talk to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me again. And I don't actually have too much to talk about. Things I hesitate to say are a little bit quiet, which I don't know when the last time was I was able to say that. But I was looking back through some old board agendas and trying to think about what's ahead for us. And I've got a couple sort of things to talk about, but in general, I feel like we're in a little bit of a lull. Without any, not to use a poor metaphor, any big fires that we're trying to put out at the board level right now. So anyway, so I think we'll have some time to sort of throw it open to topic that you guys want to talk about. Just a little update. A couple things that we are working on. At our last board meeting, we talked about tethered logging, and Josh was leading that conversation. But just there currently aren't really a set of rules around tethered logging, and that is starting to happen. We've started that process, and over the next year or two, probably. I mean, I think a certain amount of time, the department is going to sort of pursue a rule set around tethered logging. And it's, for me, and probably for a lot of family forest owners, is a little bit outside of our day-to-day. I don't know how many small woodland owners engage in that. Probably some, but that's, I bring that up as that's the current sort of rule set that is in front of the board that has to do with private forests and will affect small forest landowners. And sort of and I don't personally have much experience with it. I am familiar with it from an academic perspective. We're going to be, I think, hopefully going to be touring the tethered logging sites at our April board meeting in Goose Bay. But I've never seen it in person. I've seen videos. I understand how it works technically. Yeah, before I go on, I might just sort of throw that out to the folks in the room and on the screen of thoughts, concerns around tethered logging that I/the board should be paying attention to as we go forward with this.
Ben, I'll just point out that while right now it may be a little limiting for small woodland owners, I do think like most technology, as it gets more and more available, seems to be a lot of our, logging companies. I mean, just in the last few years, we've seen more on the landscape. So I do think it will become more available. And I think especially in areas of Southern Oregon, where the terrain is that much more harder, I think accessibility, it just provides a lot of great benefits and openings from what we've seen. So I just would say, I think while it may not be now, I think it may be a future tool that gives more landowners more opportunities, and especially some of our steeper slope areas of the state.
Absolutely. No, Julie, you make a very good point. And I think especially as it becomes more adopted and the cost comes down. And I think that I'm sure we will see it more and more on smaller and smaller acreages. But that's a great point.
We have a podcast about it on our In the Woods podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. I always thought I was familiar. So last summer they did a podcast on the OSU cut to length and tethered systems In the Woods podcast.
Okay. Yeah.
Episode 52.
So anyway, stay tuned. And if they do have thoughts or concerns or questions, feel free to reach out to me as this moves forwards. Yeah.
So that I'm curious at the board level, what sort of issues and implementation challenges and guardrails are you all thinking about at this point? What's on the table so far?
Kind of why I'm talking about this. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
We had it at our last meeting, and Josh put together a fantastic panel presentation on this topic. And I honestly came away from that panel presentation with, seems like you got it figured out. Let's put this sort of document what's currently working. There were no big red flags that have become apparent to me. As long as sort of best practices are followed, which kind of goes with any kind of logging operation, logging machinery. You can do it well or you can do it poorly, whether it's tether logging or shovel logging or cable logging or dozer logging. I mean, I think all of those things can be done well or poorly. And this fits into that category as well. I'm not coming to this process with any big concerns. I'm not really aware of any big concerns around tethered logging, but it's new, newish. It's not new. It's been around for a while, but it is not something we have a rule set for yet. And as we go into that, I'm just trying to keep my ear to the ground of what do we need to know. But I don't currently have any major concerns with it.
Do you have thoughts, Joshua, what you think the dynamic of the conversation is going to be?
So maybe what I'll do is I'll frame up kind of the policy questions as we put them to the board, right? How we got here, I'll do that as best I can without the actual presentation in front of me. Tethered logging, it's probably been around, probably close to like 10 years, I think, based on some of the discussion that folks started using that and testing that here. And so as we began to learn about it, we spent a fair bit of time in the field trying to, figure out what does this technology look like versus being used. And as we came up to speed on it, there was 2 rules in the Forest Practices Act where there was a nexus where it wasn't quite clear how tethered logging fit. And one of those was there's a rule that this was for the private forest accord and all the new rule protections and all that sort of stuff too, which is another lens that we have to figure out how that applies here. But there's a rule that says you can't have skid trails within 100 feet of any stream channel, right? And so that one, when the way we framed up the presentation for the board is those rules around skid trails were put in around the 80s or 90s, right? When there was a different type of equipment doing those and probably constructing skid trails, right? Like a different type of impact on the landscape. But not knowing what we were quite dealing with, we were requiring a plan for alternate practice for them to go ahead and operate in that area because it wasn't quite clear to us yet. And then the other place was on, we do have on the non-public safety side of the high landslide hazard locations where there's a ground-based equipment exclusion, right? For the same reason, right? Like traditionally to be on something that steep, you would have to make a skid trail, like probably, move some dirt, those sorts of things. And so with this equipment, that doesn't occur. And so we've been allowing on those 2 locations on the landscape through a plan for alternate practice. And so as we've done that, we've learned that anywhere between on an annual basis, we probably get 85 to 100 plans for alternate practice, meaning that many operations a year that plan to operate either in one of those 2 areas, right? And so from a policy basis, that's telling me that we need to do something with the rules to adjust them to appropriately fit this technology, because to have that many plans for alternate practice isn't what we would like, that's more of a site specific plan that's like custom to a geographic physical spot on the ground. So for all those 3 reasons, that's why, and it was identified in Senate Bill 1501, I think for those same reasons, because both entities want certainty around what that means in terms of the long-term operation on the landscape of Oregon. So that's kind of the policy context around what we're answering. There was a presentation by OSU, which was actually really fascinating. That was there. It's all publicly available on the board's website. But I think in general, not to get too far ahead of anything, but they've didn't have any real negative results over anything that they presented. In some cases, there were some positive results for other impacts to future forest, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, it sort of falls into that category of it can be done well. And if done right, it's pretty slick and very low impact. If done poorly, it's got a lot of impact. And so I think trying to figure out how to put those best practices into rule is what's ahead of us. But yeah, Josh framed it up pretty well. So anyway, so that's just something to watch going forward. That's on our agenda and will be happening. Two other things that are sort of outside of the board's purview, but I think are hot topics that I'm sure you guys probably have already talked about today, or maybe. But the PFA is continuing to try to inch forward, and I see two sort of watch outs, two red flags right now. And one is we're really hoping that the legislature will appropriate the funding that we need to continue this work. And I was actually just in the Capitol this morning and headed back there after this. That's one of the things I'm talking about. We need that 25 or 30 million, 30, whatever that amount is, that was not put into the governor's budget, but it's essential for seeing the PFA move forward. So that's a legislative thing. Also, just with the complete uncertainty in DC and with the federal services wanting to cross their fingers and hope and pray that we can continue to see this over the finish line, because this is really in the federal services hands at this point. And so those are just sort of two watchouts that the boards and doesn't have a lot of control over, but this is a huge process that has made it so far along. We really want to see it through the finish line. And so, yeah, I mean, those are just two things that I am watching closely, which, yeah, there's a lot of unknown as this goes forward, but we'll see.
So at this stage in the legislative process, is there any benefit that our committee can provide? I mean, it's being a member of the AMC committee, I hate to see it all go down the drain, you know, I mean, with all the work and everything's done, right? But more importantly for our committee here, is there, should we write, it just at least on behalf of ourselves, I mean, should we write to the legislator or to the, who, I mean, in order for them to appreciate the problems, they understand.
Legislators, 100%. Is there a bill number that's associated with this yet?
There is, so what, there is an agency budget bill that has that contains a portion of the GRB that contains the amount they allocated to us through the GRB.
But that's missing the 30 million, right?
Right, it focuses on, I believe 5521 is the current agency budget bill that we have.
But the problem is that the 30 million is not in there. Right, yeah, and so I don't know that 30 million has been put into a bill yet. I think it's still sort of churning in the legislature.
Okay, but is the main, you said that the governor is not in the governor's budget, but I mean, okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, do we need to write to the governor's office as well as our legislator, or just to our legislator?
I'll start with the legislators. That's where the power is right now.
But there's really no bill yet, you say, to reference, so they have something. Okay.
I haven't talked to Derek in a little while. Derek would have a better answer to that. I don't know.
Maybe there's a way we could get a follow-up on that. I mean, it might be helpful with, you know, if there's, what was it, like 3,500 bills or something have been introduced, it'd be nice to know.
To just clarify, if you want to do it individually.
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, feel free to do so. As CFF, I think we'd have to run it through.
No, I agree, but I'm just saying that it'd be nice for us if we write these individual letters to know, give them a reference point.
Are there any legislators or people that are already up to speed and you know, talking about this?
Yes. I don't know that I could tell you. I despite spending a good bit of my day at the Capitol today, I am not as clued into the legislative process this time around as I would like to be. I don't know who the champion is for this, but I know that it has some champions.
Okay, so there's already been some discussion.
This has been talked about for a long time.
So it should be a hot topic. Yes, somebody's
absolutely.
If you go to the EOLAS, the Oregon Legislative site, you just type in, you should be able to find. Okay.
What would you type in?
Keyword. I don't know what you type in for this. Because I don't know if it's been put into a bill yet. Or if it's one of those things that's just going to be sort of looped in. It's probably Ways and Means is gonna just sort of roll it in at some point between now and the end of the session, is my hunch.
I think, wasn't there an opportunity, it's like the department had its budget hearing and there was an opportunity for people to show up. And I think like Land Coalition of Oregon Land Trust showed up to support the private forest court funding. So maybe there'll be other opportunities like that and other hearings, committee hearings. For us as individuals, again, if we aren't taking action.
I think then the OSWA lobbyists would be on this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about it, happen. I mean, yes,
Just in a peripheral sense that.
yeah.
Well, and Seth and who is it from?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've
They're,
been.
they're advocating strongly for it. So
Yeah.
it has a lot of champions,
Yeah,
but it so far has not been allocated. And so I think everybody is keeping their foot on the gas.
it feels like there are a lot of hands out and a lot, since there is so much financial, so much uncertainty. It's like which hands are gonna get filled in the end of the day. Session.
And so yeah, I think, this is on your own time. But I'm advocating for it. A lot of people are advocating for it. I think we all generally want the PFA to succeed, and this is a key ingredient of that. Next topic, unless there's more questions on PFA related things. Next topic, again, a little bit out of the board's hands, but something that's I see as a hot topic is the hazard map. Which I don't know if you've talked about this at your committee already, but it's just a hot potato. And I feel like it is turned into a punching bag to air folks frustrated. Folks are frustrated with the map and the process, and that has become a vehicle for housing those frustrations. And I think the intent behind this is to try to make our state more resilient, which I think is a really important intent. And there's a lot of talk in the legislature about what's going to happen with this, and it's sort of paused right now. And I don't have any updates on where this is going, but I just wanted to highlight that the as frustrating as it is, and as cranky as various landowners are about whether they are rated correctly or not, the bigger picture behind the hazard map is we need to find ways to make this state more resilient. And we are way behind on resilience work. And if not the hazard map and the 762 plan, some future thing is going to need to happen in order to maintain that momentum of trying to build hardened communities. And so that's just another sort of flag of watch out. That's again not directly in front of the board. The board doesn't. We've done our work, but it is churning mightily in the court of public opinion and in the legislature right now. And I think it's anybody's guess where it's going to end up.
I did have a thought about that, which was, I might be misunderstanding that, but I thought there was sort of basically like a bill that was floated to just sort of withdraw the map. And then I was thinking perhaps that's the way the map was sort of put together and then publicly voted is sort of a big deal. Slang term, like the information in it that has been collected is highly relevant and useful regardless of what profile it has or the way that it's put forward as a specific thing. So I hope whatever outcome comes, that there's some appreciation for all the work that's done in terms of putting together needed and practical information, even if it ends up being floated sort of a lower level and just used as an internal document. That's a way of using the work that was done and information that, as you point out, really is needed to become more resilient.
Yeah.
Isn't it housed, is it still housed in Oregon Explorer, the information?
I think so.
Yeah, it's
So it's still just gonna be there, whether it's the official map.
Well, and I think, I mean, it's until somebody decides to take it out of there, but I mean, I think that my understanding, the data, underlying data of the map is rock solid.
It's the data.
And it is, the map itself is very powerful and highly accurate. It's how we choose to interpret the information that is presented there is where the rub is. But you're right, even if if this continues to evolve, the data exists and has been created and is in the public domain at this point, and that has value on its own. Yeah, so those are just some highlights of things that are mostly outside the board's purview, but are things that have crossed the board's path and have crossed CFF's path over the years. And see, Josh, are worth paying attention to. And the next topic is more personal for me and just sort of a preview of what I'm interested in working on at the board level going forwards. And it's probably worth saying out loud, I should say at every meeting, that I'm here speaking as me. I'm not speaking for the board. I'm trying to summarize and present what the board has been working on and will be working on. But yeah, I am speaking as Ben Boyman, not member of the board, but not speaking for the board. And I never want to try to speak for the board in my role here. But something that has been near and dear to my heart for a long time and continues to is the challenge of land conversion and continuing to lose forest lands. And that's something that I am going to be trying to spend more of my time on in my next 4 years on board, to just dig into that more, because we continue to lose forest lands in this state, and we have no real ways of measuring that. It is a really big loophole in our ability to collect data and ability it's not regulated. And so
you mean in a zoning sense or in a actual, because we have data. I mean, we just saw a presentation on how to quantify forest, but in the zoning sense, that would be it.
So no, it's actually less so in the zoning sense, because the zones are agnostic pretty much when it comes to natural resource lands. Farm and forest are really lumped together in most of the zoning rules.
Timber, though, is by itself.
Right, but if you look at the actual zoning ordinance, ag is permitted in timber and timber is permitted in ag. Like those in most, I'm familiar with Polk County zoning ordinances, but as long as it's ag, the county's pretty happy. As long as it's natural resources, whether it's ag or timber. And we don't currently have any rules to, or even any way to pay attention to converting timber to ag. Yeah, and I don't think most zoning ordinances would speak to that much. I think that's usually a permitted outright use. If you're going from timber to ag, that's from a zoning perspective, I don't think there's anything there. And from an ODF perspective, from a Forest Practices Act perspective, as soon as it's converted, the Forest Practices Act doesn't apply anymore.
But we just saw a presentation where you can quantify the amount of forests that are there, right?
Tell me more. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, with the land mapper, I mean, you can, even at a landscape scale now, they're applying it to be able to make these estimates of changes over time. What I'm getting at is that I agree with you completely, is that what I'm seeing is areas where in our community where people, whether it's the measure 37, the previous measure 49, they're being exercised to convert forest land to, like mansions or just.
That is a zoning challenge. That is, there are zoning rules there that are
they're being abused. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm getting at, is I'm main concern in our community is that, or those that aren't being good stewards of the property. And, they may be zoned as forest land but there's nothing growing there because there's just a heap of blackberries.
Right.
Or the folks that can't, that's the estate planning kind of thing where, because we've known families where the way things end up that it ends up getting parceled out and sold and,
Yep.
yeah, and then it's lost. So, yeah. There are, I think, you'll have a lot of people on that bandwagon.
Yeah, there's a lot of different, I think you flagged a bunch, there's a bunch of different challenges to conversion of forest lands. And, but while I think we do have the tools to measure that, oh, Julie's got her hand up.
Hey, Ben. So we do have some long-term tools that we have that data in Oregon with the, the Forest Service, the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. And I think, so I would caution saying that we don't have any tools because we do have some long-term data that we watch on that. I think where it is a lot of times in the valley area where land may have typically not been forest land, but we grew forest there that we now are seeing converted to other uses. And so I think, just thinking about how we're approaching some of that terminology would be, a great conversation. And I would love to have more of this online because we do keep a lot of data. And if you start looking at like the data mart of the data that's available in Oregon, we've tracked that for some time. Some of the trends we're seeing, and this is something that we saw also if you look at like California, and this is where the conversations have been lately, is also forestry still staying in forestry, but is converting from like smallholder owners to tribal or to trust or to other landowners. So there's also a few, I would also say, not always is it just forest leaving forest land, but there's also who's owning that forest land. And then I think you're right, there's kind of that ag forestry because it's so dependent on how each county categorizes their forest land. But we do have a lot of landowners who are in timber deferrals and forest land who a lot of counties, there is no changing of that unless you've really gone through a process. So I just, caution a little bit about doing big sweeping things because I don't think we see that in every county.
Yeah, and I think thank you, Julie. And I think my perspective is very much based in the West Valley. And I think that's where where I literally see thousands of acres every year being converted away from forest lands. Anecdotally, just seeing that. And I have looked at the FIA data. I have looked at there's a couple different data sets that the state of Oregon compiles at some interval that doesn't, the data sets that I've looked at don't align with the real world in Polk, Yamhill, Marion, Mid-Valley area that I know well. Those data sets don't pass muster to my reading of them. They're superficial and high level that lose the granularity of the actual happening on the grounds. So it is nuanced. And I think it is, depending on the part of the state, there is different challenges converting our forest land. In southern and eastern Oregon, we're losing forest land because of fire. Fires burn catastrophically and we're not able to put trees back there. So there's a lot of different reasons that we're losing forest land, but in aggregate, we are losing forest land. We are not gaining forest lands in this state. And that is something I think we should all be concerned about. And first and foremost in measuring it. We have a handful of moderately accurate, imperfect tools that can currently measure it. And there is no central person, office, agency that is paying attention to this. It is distributed among a half a dozen different state agencies that all sort of have a little bit of a nexus to it, but trying to figure out how to start to quantify it. Maybe there's less of a problem than I think. But I think we all kind of in our guts probably now, well, we've all seen that when we're driving around that, oh yeah, they just cleared that. That it is happening.
Good.
And
I
I would say, Ben, that ODF used to have more GIS and people that were part of that. So that may be something to look back historically about the division that used to help kind of keep an eye on that more.
Yeah. And I've talked a lot with John and Danny who sort of run a lot of that mapping work. And there was forest and ag report that comes out every 5 years that I've looked at as well. But again, it's like the FIA data, it's very high level, not very granular. But no, I think there is data out there. It's just not being aggregated right now.
Yeah, I mean, and there have been some studies, I think the last one was maybe 20 years ago, where they did what you would need to do to really get at that. So it's certainly the data is there. It's a question of do we muster a new project that's really going to get down and do it accurately as far as giving us an idea, well, just how bad is it? You know, that subjective judgment that it's bad as a forester, but that can be done. And then the question is maybe where is it happening? And then the big thing is why and what can you do?
Yeah.
A related issue is that the loss of the family forest land or the small forest land it's still forest perhaps, but it's going either back to industry or it's getting just fragmented and not quote a managed family forest anymore. And that's a big issue that we've been talking about here is that you know, that we've lost maybe 1 million acres of family forest has gone to some other kind of forest or woodland or non-woodland.
And yeah, I mean, I think the reason I'm interested in bringing it up here is because it disproportionately impacts small forest landowners who are on the margins, who are on the edges. That's where those are the acres that small forest landowners are taken care of where this is most prevalent. And we're not losing forest land up on the top of the Coast Range. We're losing it on the margins. And we're losing for all sorts of different reasons. And, you know, it's not productive. It's not valuable. It's not generating revenue. Some other use will generate more revenue. And so there's a lot of relatively legitimate reasons for this to happen, but I think it happens sort of under the radar. I have not been able to find a data set yet and find somebody at the state who can tell me with any certainty whatsoever how many acres we're losing forest land a year. That's not a number it might exist, but it's not a number that's being paid attention to.
Yeah, there is a good study that's outdated by 20 years, and things have changed a lot in 20 years.
I was going to say that I think it's something that seems to be happening while one is looking for the data set. You can sometimes that can stall you in terms of taking action. There are different tools because the situations are different all over the state. Like the climate valleys, often a high likelihood of conversion to other uses that are non-working forest uses. And it's an issue that's really important. This committee, we've talked about it a lot. It's important to me from a person who does like conservation easement transactions, because it can be one of the tools for having a revenue stream for keeping working lands. So it's important to maintain like programs that fund those things, like watershed enhancement board programs and under the accord, like the mitigation fund and its acquisitions program. That is one way to avoid this kind of conversion, is to provide an alternate revenue stream where essentially landowners voluntarily can enter into programs where they're compensated for keeping the working lands as working lands. So we've had in this committee, some of the things, I'm just pulling up my old like ideas for presentations, because we've talked about, I think Mauricio had talked about stewardship economy, his hands up, I can turn it to him. And we talked about talking to Wallowa Resources, someone talking about, again, alternative revenue streams that can help small landowners push back.
So
and then we talked about
Oregon Woodland Co-op is another great example of Oregon Woodland Co-op.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Alternative revenue streams.
Yeah.
For small woodland owners.
And then we were thinking about talking about succession and tax issues a bit, and then also maybe having the Nature Conservancy talk about its models for this kind of keeping working lands as working lands and thinking about revenue streams. So anyway, definitely something we have talked consistently in this committee about financial viability for small forest landowners, and that maybe needing to change over time and ways to creatively work for that. But I'll hand it over to Mauricio and see what he has to say. Mauricio?
Thank you. So, Ben, thank you. I love where your heart is taking you. It clearly speaks of your passion, and this is incredibly important, not just to those of us that are lucky enough to live, play, and work on our forest lands, but in general, right? What are we looking at the big picture? I have a statement that I like to make. In addition to all we have said, that the diminishing infrastructure that allow us to bring and put the value on some of that. And I know that we are not here for the values, right? Only, but when the ability of bring a product to the market, it basically becomes impossible because sawmills are closing, and especially on the eastern side of the state, we have that impediment. We don't have places to process. I think we're left with a couple of few alternative. I say one, thank you for mentioning conservation easement as one. But the other one, we have to come up with some quick and courageous piloting models that we can actually bring to families and to communities to say, let's try this out. If we are hoping for the bigger industries to come back with national forest contracts to come and doing train loads of units of 2x6s to move here and there, we may be looking at the wrong models to come up with something new. The pressure on the land and the price that you can get today just to converting some of this in residential are immense. The pressure is there. So I think that collectively we need to say, can we be recklessly creative and try or testing something that we have not done before? An example, I grew up in Italy where almost every little community, every little place has a wine co-op. Not everybody that makes, not all the people that actually raise grapes can become vintners. So every little village has a wine co-op. That means you bring a truckload, 2 truckloads, 3 truckloads to the co-op. They make the wine, and in turn, that wine is consumed 95% at local level. Can we envision, as an example, some forestry co-ops that transform or uses local sawmill to include and engage some local producers a very small amount? I am throwing an example and a model out there that may or may not be able to be scaled up. But what I'm saying in general, we need something quick, something courageous. And if we fail, some of these models will fail with, I'd rather fail having tried something than sit down for another 25 years and hoping that things will change. So include me if you want to help me out setting up a forestry producing co-op or something silly as that. I think we need different models that will allow that precious word, family forest land, to remain such.
No, Maritza, you make a phenomenal point. Thank you. And I think everybody, all of these points are great. And I think often when somebody says, "Oh, here's a problem," everyone, there's the knee-jerk reaction is, "Oh, what's the regulation that's going to solve the problem?" And in this case, it's I think this conversation is just testament to the great minds here in this room, and that I personally feel like there's a problem. The solutions, like Mauricio said, are and Wendy said, they're wide ranging. There's lots of reasons why this is happening, and there's lots of ways to create the conditions where there might not be as much of a reason to convert your land. And it's part of a big, large conversation, but one that I don't hear happening enough when it comes to actually losing acres of timber. Access to markets is a huge one. And especially for small forest landowners, it's really challenging and really challenging.
Well, sometimes it feels like the being really small is one of the bigger challenges. I mean, and it's our personal kind of thing, but every time we hear about sort of access to different carbon markets or different kinds of things, we're always too small. A land trust kind of stuff, no one's interested. And it's like, and we're not that small. I mean, based on how much work we spent and how much money we poured into it, but that's some of the group where I think
really easy to lose a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and that can really add up. So it's like, yeah, I love I love recklessly creative.
Yeah.
Because it feels like it's easy to be very doom and gloom. And sometimes there seems like there's so much creativity and passion and interest and expertise, but sometimes it ends up we sort of are fighting amongst ourselves as opposed to actually doing the recklessly creative thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what that would be. Julie?
Yeah, I just wanted great conversation and just wanted Ben encourage you to with the Board of Forestry. You know, there's other boards. I look at like Department of Agriculture and their board has put a lot of study ideas before the legislature for trying to help fund kind of those big picture, big things. And it's been around, you know, I see it around helping Oregon agriculture be competitive. That seems in line with forestry, you know, being competitive in a world setting. I think this question about conversion, you know, reforestation, afforestation, I think there's really a lot there. And I do think I would encourage you to take a look at what are other boards that have also put together similar type studies for their sector, and that the Board of Forestry hasn't necessarily gone that route in recent years compared again historically. And so there may be something there, and happy to continue that conversation and encourage you to take a look at some of your similar sectors and things that they bring forward on the behalf of the entire industry.
Yeah, no, Julie, you make a phenomenal point, and this is more than just ODF. There's 4 or 5 different agencies that all touch this, and I think convening a lot of smart minds across a lot of agencies, I think has a lot of value, and ODF is one of many, but these are trees we're talking about, so it should be something we're paying attention to.
Yeah. Department of Agriculture calls foresters patient farmers. So many things.
Yeah. There's wonderful value in that. That's if the markets are down, just let the trees grow another year.
Yeah. And hope there's not a fire.
And hope that's
Right, it does seem like Maritza was saying that the answer is probably going to lie somewhere in community, like finding ways to scale up, say, a conservation easement on a small property, have the landowners cooperate and do it on a larger property for some kind of economy of scale, or similarly for some carbon projects, like on the East Coast, there's already programs allowing smaller landowners to aggregate and do a carbon project together. But those just need to develop over time at a pace that's soon enough.
Yeah. Well, we used up my time. Despite it being a slow time at the board, we had plenty to talk about as always. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep me in the loop if there's more things that we need to be paying attention to.
All right.
Good luck pounding the pavement here in Salem.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for your effort and
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course. No, it's honestly, it's nice talking to legislators.
you're running the sawmill while you're.
I thankfully have a phenomenal crew that manages to keep things going without me. Yeah, I seem to not really be at the sawmill much at all these days.
Yeah, well, one of your people, Brett Aldrich. Been more.
Yeah.
It's one of our master the managers.
Oh, yeah, right. No, that's fantastic.
He works with you.
Yeah.
Full time there.
Yeah.
I digress.
I guess he's 4 days a week, but it gets up to 40 hours most of the time, so. Yeah.
But personal, not on the.
Okay, thank you, Ben, for being here. Thanks so much for the good conversation, everyone, and we're gonna break for lunch.
Thank you.
Okay.